Why do you feel emotionally exhausted when you have done nothing all day? They told you rest should make you feel better. They told you a quiet day should give you peace. They told you that if your body is not working, then you should not be tired. But if that were true, why does your chest still feel heavy? Why does your mind feel crowded, even when the room is silent? Why do you lie down to rest and still feel like something inside you is running? The truth is, your body may be still, but your mind may be carrying a whole world. Unfinished thoughts, hidden emotions, silent worries, old conversations, future fears, and the quiet resistance to life as it is. Buddhist wisdom teaches that tiredness does not always come from action. Sometimes it comes from clinging, from wanting the day to be different, from fighting feelings you do not want to feel, from chasing certainty in a world that was never built to be controlled. And when the mind keeps pulling away from the present moment, even doing nothing can feel like carrying a mountain. Tonight, as you listen to these lessons, you will begin to understand why your spirit feels so drained, even when your hands have done very little. Your breathing will slow, your mind will soften, and the weight you could not explain will finally begin to make sense. Because this is not laziness, this is not weakness. This is the pain of a mind that has forgotten how to rest. This is not just another audio about feeling tired. This is a quiet return to the present moment, a gentle way back to yourself. Are you ready? Let's begin. Sometimes the deepest exhaustion has nothing to do with work. It comes from the quiet war happening inside you every moment of the day. A war between where you are and where you think life should be. A war between the present moment and the version of reality your mind keeps demanding. And the painful part is that most people never realize they are fighting at all. The body may be sitting still on a couch, lying in bed, or staring out of a window, but inside the mind is arguing with life itself. Buddhism teaches that this hidden resistance is one of the greatest causes of suffering. Not because life is always painful, but because the mind keeps whispering, "This moment should be different." And little by little, that whisper becomes exhaustion. There is a strange kind of tiredness that appears when your life looks calm on the outside, but inside, something never stops pulling against reality. You wake up already feeling emotionally heavy, even though the day has barely started. You scroll through your phone, stare at the ceiling, walk around your house, maybe even try to rest, but nothing truly restores you. The body pauses, but the mind never lands anywhere. It keeps searching, comparing, resisting, replaying, wanting things to feel easier, wanting people to act differently, wanting yourself to feel happier, calmer, more motivated, more loved, more certain. And at first, this seems harmless. After all, everybody wants a better life. Everybody dreams about peace, success, love, clarity, or emotional relief. But Buddhism asks a deeper question. What happens when your entire inner world becomes dependent on life being different before you allow yourself to feel okay? That is where exhaustion begins. Most people think emotional exhaustion comes from doing too much. Sometimes it does. But there is another kind that comes from mentally rejecting the present moment over and over again. It is the exhaustion of arguing with reality silently, the exhaustion of waking up and immediately feeling disappointed by your life before the day has even unfolded. The mind says, "I should be further ahead by now. I should feel happier than this. People should understand me more. Life should not feel this difficult." And because those thoughts happen so quickly, they often feel true instead of exhausting. But every one of those thoughts creates friction inside the nervous system. Every quiet resistance pulls energy away from peace. It is like trying to swim against a current all day without realizing you are fighting water every second. Eventually, even resting becomes tiring because the resistance never stops. One of the hardest truths Buddhist wisdom reveals is that suffering often increases not because life is unbearable, but because the mind refuses to stop negotiating with what already exists. The present moment arrives exactly as it is, but the mind keeps trying to rewrite it, and that invisible struggle drains emotional energy more than people realize. You can see this clearly in ordinary moments. Someone wakes up on a rainy morning and immediately feels irritated because they wanted sunshine. Someone sits alone at dinner and feels emotional pain, not because solitude itself is unbearable, but because they believe they should not be alone. Another person spends an entire afternoon feeling restless because life feels stuck, even though nothing dangerous is happening at all. The suffering is not only in the event, it is in the resistance to the event. This is why two people can live through the exact same experience while carrying completely different emotional weights. One person accepts the moment and adapts to it gently. The other fights it internally for hours, days, or years. The external situation may be identical, but the internal relationship to reality changes everything. The exhausting part is that resistance rarely announces itself loudly. It hides inside ordinary thinking. It sounds like planning, worrying, fixing, comparing, regretting, or fantasizing. It becomes so normal that people think they are simply thinking about life, when in reality they are carrying a constant emotional tension inside their own mind. Even while resting, the mind keeps saying no to the present moment. No to how the body feels, no to where life currently is, no to uncertainty, no to loneliness, no to boredom, no to imperfection, no to waiting, no to sadness, no to not knowing. And eventually, the nervous system becomes exhausted from carrying so many invisible rejections. This is why emotional exhaustion can feel so confusing. You look at your day and think, "But I barely did anything," yet internally you spent hours resisting reality without realizing it. You spent hours mentally living somewhere else, somewhere better, somewhere different, somewhere where everything finally makes sense. But peace cannot grow in a mind that refuses to stay where the body already is. There is a reason Buddhist teachings return again and again to the present moment. Not because the present moment is always magical or beautiful, but because fighting it creates endless suffering. The Buddha understood something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Reality does not become lighter through resistance. The mind simply becomes heavier. Think about how often your happiness depends on conditions. I will feel better when this problem disappears. I will relax when I finally know what is happening. I will be peaceful when people change. I will rest when I become more successful. The mind keeps postponing peace into the future, which means the nervous system never fully relaxes now. This creates a subtle but constant emotional pressure. The body lives here, but the mind lives somewhere else entirely. And when the mind abandons the present moment long enough, exhaustion becomes inevitable. Many people spend years believing they are tired because life is difficult, when part of their tiredness actually comes from carrying an internal argument with life itself. They wake up already disappointed, already comparing, already chasing another emotional state before the day even begins. Social media intensifies this exhaustion in ways people rarely notice. Every scroll becomes another reminder that life could be different. Better body, better relationship, better job, better personality, better future. The mind absorbs thousands of silent messages every day telling it that the present moment is not enough. And because the human brain is deeply sensitive to comparison, it begins resisting ordinary life more and more. Suddenly, quiet moments feel empty instead of peaceful. Simplicity feels like failure. Rest feels unproductive. Ordinary life starts feeling emotionally unbearable because the mind has become addicted to wanting more. not necessarily more possessions, but more emotional certainty, more validation, more stimulation, more proof that life is moving correctly. But Buddhism teaches that craving itself becomes suffering when the mind cannot stop grasping for another moment. The tragedy is not that humans desire happiness. The tragedy is that many people cannot experience the life already in front of them because they are emotionally trapped in the pursuit of a different one. And this pursuit is exhausting. You can feel this especially during quiet evenings. The body finally stops moving, but instead of peace, the mind becomes louder. Thoughts rush in, regrets surface, anxiety appears, the future feels uncertain. Suddenly, rest feels uncomfortable because there is no distraction left from the internal resistance that has been operating all day. This is why some people stay constantly busy. Busyness can temporarily hide emotional resistance. Noise covers the discomfort for a while. Productivity creates the illusion of control, but eventually silence returns. And when silence returns, the unresolved tension inside becomes impossible to ignore. The mind says, something is missing. But often, what is missing is not another achievement. It is the ability to fully arrive inside the life already happening. That arrival is difficult because modern life trains people to believe peace exists somewhere ahead, somewhere earned, somewhere perfected. But Buddhist wisdom points in the opposite direction. Peace begins when resistance softens, not when life becomes perfect. This does not mean becoming passive or pretending pain does not exist. Buddhism never asks people to stop caring about life. It asks them to stop emotionally fighting every moment they cannot control. There is a difference between healthy change and emotional resistance. Healthy change says, I will improve what I can with clarity. Resistance says, I refuse to let myself feel okay until reality obeys me. One creates growth, the other creates exhaustion. You can feel this difference inside the body. Resistance tightens the chest, it hardens the jaw, it speeds up the mind. It creates restlessness even in silence. Acceptance softens the nervous system, not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because the mind finally stops pulling against the moment. This is why some people feel emotionally lighter after crying honestly for the first time in months. The exhaustion was never only sadness. It was the tension of resisting sadness. The body relaxes when it no longer has to fight its own emotional reality. The same is true for uncertainty. Many people are not exhausted because uncertainty exists. They are exhausted because they spend every waking moment trying to mentally eliminate uncertainty. The mind searches for guarantees that life can never fully provide. Will things work out? Will I be okay? Will they stay? Will I fail? Will I regret this? The mind keeps demanding answers before allowing peace, but life rarely gives permanent answers, so the nervous system remains trapped in constant tension, waiting for certainty that never fully arrives. Buddhist wisdom teaches something radically different. Peace is not found by controlling life completely. Peace is found by learning how to stay present even when life remains uncertain. That lesson changes everything, because when the mind stops demanding perfection from reality, emotional energy begins returning naturally. The nervous system no longer wastes itself fighting every uncomfortable moment. Breathing becomes easier. Silence becomes less threatening. Rest begins feeling like rest again. And strangely, life itself starts feeling softer. Not because problems disappear overnight, but because the inner war begins quieting down. You stop demanding that every moment justify itself before you allow yourself to breathe fully. You stop treating peace like a reward that must be earned through suffering. You begin understanding that emotional exhaustion is often the result of carrying too much mental resistance for too long. There is deep compassion in realizing this, because many people blame themselves for being tired. They call themselves lazy, weak, unmotivated, broken, but often they are simply emotionally overloaded from years of fighting reality internally, years of pretending, years of worrying, years of comparing, years of mentally escaping the present moment, years of believing peace only exists somewhere else. No wonder the heart feels tired, and perhaps this is why the present moment feels so uncomfortable to many people, because when everything becomes quiet, they finally meet the resistance they have been carrying all along. The sadness, the fear, the unmet expectations, the loneliness, the grief over how life turned out versus how they imagined it would. But Buddhism gently reminds us that healing does not begin by escaping the present moment. Healing begins by learning how to stop abandoning yourself inside it. That is the real exhaustion, not simply being alive, but constantly leaving the life that is already here in search of another emotional reality. And slowly, through awareness, something changes. You begin noticing the moments when your mind starts fighting reality again. You notice how quickly tension appears when life does not match your expectations. You notice how often peace disappears because the mind immediately says, "This should not be happening." That awareness alone is powerful. Because you cannot soften resistance, you never notice. Little by little, you begin practicing something unfamiliar, allowing moments to exist without immediately trying to emotionally rewrite them, letting sadness be sadness, letting uncertainty be uncertainty, letting ordinary days be enough without demanding constant stimulation or proof that life is moving correctly. This does not make you emotionless. It makes you less divided inside yourself. And the less divided you become, the less exhausted you feel. Because emotional exhaustion is often the cost of carrying too many inner battles at once. The mind was never meant to wage war against reality every moment of the day. Sometimes peace begins in a very small place, a single breath where you stop demanding that life feel different right now, a quiet moment where you stop chasing another version of yourself, a moment where you allow this imperfect day to simply exist without punishment. And in that moment, the nervous system finally feels something it may not have felt in a very long time. Not excitement, not certainty, not perfection, just relief. Relief begins the moment the mind stops fighting every part of reality. But for many people, the struggle does not end there. Even after the day becomes quiet, the mind keeps reopening doors that were never fully closed. Old conversations return, unspoken words echo again, arguments replay themselves deep into the night. And without realizing it, people spend enormous emotional energy reliving moments that no longer exist. Some of the heaviest exhaustion does not come from what happened today. It comes from carrying yesterday over and over inside the mind. There are conversations that end in real life but never truly end inside you. The room becomes quiet. The other person leaves. The phone call finishes. The messages stop. Yet something continues speaking inside your head for hours, days, sometimes even years. You replay what they said. You replay what you should have said. You imagine different versions of the moment, different outcomes, different reactions. And slowly, without noticing it, your mind becomes a theater of unfinished emotional scenes. This kind of exhaustion is difficult to explain because from the outside, nothing is happening. You may be lying in bed, sitting quietly, driving, eating, or staring at your phone. But internally, entire emotional battles are unfolding again and again. The nervous system responds to those imagined scenes almost as if they are still happening in real time. The heart tightens, the breathing changes, the body becomes tense. Emotional energy drains away even though the body itself has barely moved. This is one of the hidden reasons people feel emotionally exhausted after seemingly doing nothing. The body rests, but the mind keeps carrying conversations that never found peace. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the mind has a deep attachment to unresolved emotional experiences. It keeps returning to moments that created pain, confusion, shame, anger, regret, or longing, because it believes that if it replays them enough, it will finally gain control over what happened. But most of the time, the replaying does not create peace. It creates deeper exhaustion. The mind says, "Maybe if I think about it one more time, I will finally understand. Maybe if I imagine the perfect response, I will stop feeling hurt. Maybe if I replay the conversation again, I can undo the feeling it left behind." But instead of closure, the nervous system becomes trapped in emotional repetition. It is like scratching a wound over and over while hoping it will heal faster. One painful conversation can live inside someone for years. A harsh comment from a parent, a betrayal from a friend, a breakup that ended without understanding, a moment of embarrassment, a sentence spoken in anger. The mind stores emotional moments differently from ordinary memories because emotional pain activates survival systems inside the brain. The mind becomes hyper-focused on unfinished emotional experiences because it believes they are threats that must be solved before safety can return. But emotional safety rarely arrives through endless mental replay. In fact, the replaying itself often becomes the source of suffering. You can feel this most strongly at night. During the day, distractions temporarily cover the mind's unfinished conversations. Noise, responsibilities, work, scrolling, errands, television, social interaction. But when silence finally arrives, the mind begins opening old doors again. Suddenly, you remember something someone said 10 years ago. A mistake you made resurfaces. A conversation you wish had gone differently begins playing in loops. And the strange part is that the body reacts emotionally even when the event is long gone. This is why emotional exhaustion can feel so physical. Thoughts are not weightless. The nervous system responds to emotional memories as if danger is still nearby. Stress hormones rise, muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow. The body prepares itself for emotional defense, even while sitting safely in a quiet room. Many people underestimate how much energy is consumed by internal conversations. A person may spend hours mentally arguing with someone who is not even present. Imagined replies become endless. Entire speeches form in the mind. The person mentally explains themselves, defends themselves, proves themselves, or seeks validation from people who may never actually give it. And because the conversation never truly resolves, the mind stays emotionally activated. This is why some people feel tired immediately after overthinking. The brain consumes enormous energy during emotional rumination. But more importantly, emotional replay keeps the nervous system trapped between the past and the present. The body is here, but the mind keeps, emotionally returning somewhere painful. Buddhism speaks deeply about attachment, but many people misunderstand what attachment really means. Attachment is not only holding on to people or possessions. Sometimes attachment means holding on to emotional scenes that the mind refuses to release, holding on to what should have happened, holding on to the need to be understood, holding on to unfairness, holding on to emotional pain because the mind fears letting go means the experience did not matter. But holding on to emotional scenes too tightly slowly exhausts the heart. There are people who carry one conversation inside themselves for decades. One rejection, one humiliation, one abandonment, one betrayal. The external moment ended long ago, yet internally the mind still sits inside that room emotionally trying to survive it. And this creates a hidden emotional fatigue most people cannot see. Sometimes the replaying is not even about anger. Sometimes it is longing. The mind replays beautiful memories because it cannot accept that those moments are gone. Old relationships become emotional homes. The mind keeps visiting because the present moment feels emptier by comparison. A person remembers how someone used to laugh, how they used to text, how they used to look at them. The mind replays those moments repeatedly, trying to feel emotionally connected again. But eventually, even longing becomes exhausting because the heart is living in memories instead of reality. This is one of the reasons emotional exhaustion often feels confusing. The mind is not only processing current life, it is carrying unfinished emotional energy from the past, while also creating imagined conversations about the future. Someone may spend an entire afternoon mentally preparing for a conversation that has not even happened yet. They rehearse what they will say, they anticipate rejection, they predict misunderstanding, they create emotional scenarios before reality even unfolds. And by the time the actual conversation arrives, they are already emotionally drained. The mind believes it is protecting itself by rehearsing everything in advance, but often it is simply exhausting itself through emotional anticipation. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the mind suffers greatly when it leaves the present moment and becomes trapped inside mental storytelling. Stories about the past, stories about the future, stories about who hurt us, stories about who might leave, stories about how things should have happened differently. The painful part is that these stories feel deeply personal, which makes them difficult to release. People become emotionally identified with their mental replaying. They believe the overthinking is helping them somehow, but often it is only keeping the wound emotionally alive. There is a difference between reflection and rumination. Reflection creates understanding. Rumination creates emotional imprisonment. Reflection allows emotions to move. Rumination keeps emotions trapped in circles. One brings awareness, the other drains life force quietly. Many people think they need closure from others in order to feel peace, but Buddhism gently points toward another truth. Sometimes closure begins when the mind stops demanding that the past become different before it allows itself to rest. That does not mean pretending pain did not happen. It means recognizing that endless replaying cannot change what already occurred. This is incredibly difficult because the human mind craves resolution. It wants emotional certainty. It wants fairness. It wants explanations. It wants the past to finally make emotional sense. But life rarely gives perfect emotional endings. Many conversations remain incomplete. Many people never apologize. Many misunderstandings remain unresolved. And if the mind refuses to rest until every emotional experience feels complete, exhaustion becomes unavoidable. Some people carry invisible conversations with their parents for their entire lives. Even after childhood ends, the emotional dialogue continues internally. They still seek approval, still replay criticism, still defend themselves emotionally against voices that shaped them years ago. Others carry unfinished conversations with former partners. They replay the breakup repeatedly, trying to identify the exact moment things changed. They wonder what they missed. They mentally negotiate with memories, trying to emotionally repair what no longer exists. And some people carry conversations with themselves. These may be the most exhausting conversations of all. The mind constantly says, "You should have known better. You ruined everything. You are not enough. You always fail. You should be further ahead." This internal dialogue never fully stops, so the nervous system never fully relaxes either. The person may look calm externally, but internally they are being emotionally attacked by their own thoughts all day long. No wonder the heart feels tired. This is why Buddhist teachings place so much importance on observing the mind without immediately becoming trapped inside every thought. The mind produces endless emotional commentary, but not every thought deserves your life force. Many thoughts are simply emotional echoes, echoes of fear, echoes of shame, echoes of loneliness, echoes of old pain that still wants resolution. But when awareness grows, something important begins happening. You start noticing when the mind reopens old emotional rooms. You begin recognizing the moment replaying starts. You feel how quickly the body tightens when old conversations return. That awareness creates space, and in that space, there is finally the possibility of not following every thought endlessly. This is not easy. Some emotional scenes are deeply painful because they touch wounds connected to love, identity, belonging, or self-worth. The mind returns to them because it wants emotional completion. But constantly reopening emotional pain rarely creates healing. Often, it only deepens emotional fatigue. Healing begins when the mind learns that not every memory must become a permanent residence. There is tremendous freedom in allowing certain conversations to remain unfinished without carrying them forever. Not because they did not matter, but because your peace matters too. The mind often believes that letting go means approving of what happened. But letting go is not approval. It is choosing not to sacrifice your emotional energy to moments that can no longer be changed. That choice is difficult because the ego wants emotional justice. It wants the perfect final sentence, the perfect explanation, the perfect apology, the perfect understanding. But life is rarely emotionally symmetrical. Sometimes people leave without clarity. Sometimes love changes quietly. Sometimes misunderstandings never resolve. Sometimes people hurt you from their own confusion. Sometimes closure never arrives in the form you hoped for. And still, your life continues. Buddhist wisdom gently teaches that peace becomes possible when the mind stops trying to emotionally relive every wound in order to feel safe again. Safety cannot grow in a mind constantly reopening pain. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply. Mindfulness is not about becoming emotionless. It is about returning awareness to what is happening now instead of endlessly drowning in mental replaying. Right now, this breath, this room, this moment. Not the conversation from 5 years ago, not the imagined argument tomorrow, not the endless emotional rehearsal. The present moment becomes a refuge when the mind stops abandoning it constantly. This takes practice because the mind is addicted to emotional storytelling. It wants to solve every unresolved feeling through thinking. But some emotions soften not through analysis, but through compassionate presence. Sometimes the deepest healing comes from simply noticing, I am replaying this again. I am exhausting myself trying to rewrite the past. I am carrying a conversation that no longer exists. That awareness is powerful because it interrupts unconscious suffering. And slowly the nervous system begins understanding something new. It no longer has to stay emotionally prepared for conversations that already ended. It no longer has to defend itself against every memory. It no longer has to live in emotional rehearsal constantly. This does not happen overnight. The mind has habits built over years. But each moment of awareness weakens the emotional grip of replaying. You begin breathing more deeply again, sleeping more peacefully again, feeling present more often again, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because the mind stops carrying entire emotional worlds every moment of the day. And perhaps this is one of the quietest forms of freedom Buddhism offers. The freedom to stop emotionally living inside conversations that are already over. The freedom to stop spending your life force replaying pain endlessly. The freedom to return gently to the life still unfolding right here. The mind becomes lighter when it stops carrying conversations that already ended. But even after old words fade, another kind of exhaustion quietly takes their place. the exhaustion of always living somewhere ahead of yourself, somewhere beyond this breath, somewhere beyond this moment. Many people are physically present in their lives, but mentally they are constantly running toward tomorrow. And the painful part is that they rarely notice how much energy disappears while trying to arrive somewhere that does not exist yet. Some people wake up tired before the day even begins because their mind has already traveled into the future. Before their feet touch the floor, they are already worrying about next week, next month, next year. Their body is here, but their thoughts are already chasing problems that have not happened, conversations that have not occurred, failures that may never arrive, and fears that have not yet become real. This is one of the quietest forms of emotional exhaustion. Living ahead of the breath. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows when the mind abandons the present moment and becomes trapped in constant anticipation. The future itself is not the problem. Planning is not the problem. The problem begins when the mind loses its ability to stay here because it is emotionally addicted to what comes next. There is a deep difference between preparing for life and mentally escaping into the future all day long. One creates clarity. The other slowly drains peace from the nervous system. Many people live as if the present moment is only a waiting room for a future version of life where everything will finally feel okay. They tell themselves, "Once I solve this problem, I will relax. Once I know what is happening, I will feel safe. Once life becomes stable, I will finally breathe deeply." But the future keeps moving. Every time one worry disappears, another appears immediately behind it. The mind never truly arrives anywhere because it has trained itself to survive through anticipation. This is why even peaceful days can feel emotionally heavy. The body may be resting, but internally the mind is already carrying tomorrow's uncertainty. It rehearses possibilities constantly. It predicts disasters. It searches for emotional guarantees. It scans the future, trying to eliminate pain before it happens. But the nervous system was never designed to carry endless imagined futures all at once. You can see this clearly in ordinary moments. Someone sits quietly at dinner, but mentally they are worrying about bills, relationships, health, aging, mistakes, or things they still need to accomplish. Another person lies in bed at night, but their mind is already living inside tomorrow morning. Someone else cannot enjoy a beautiful moment because they are already afraid it will end. The body remains in one place while the mind keeps abandoning it. And eventually, the nervous system becomes exhausted from constantly traveling into futures it cannot control. Buddhism places enormous importance on the breath because the breath exists only here. Not in yesterday, not in tomorrow. Every breath is an invitation back into reality before the mind disappears again into imagined worlds. But modern life trains people to live ahead of themselves constantly. Productivity culture glorifies future obsession. Society praises people for always thinking ahead, always planning, always preparing, always achieving. The mind becomes conditioned to believe stillness is dangerous. Presence feels unproductive. Rest feels irresponsible. So even during quiet moments, the mind refuses to stop moving. A person drinks coffee while thinking about work. They shower while replaying future scenarios. They walk while worrying. They eat while scrolling. They try to sleep while mentally solving problems. The breath becomes ignored because the mind has become addicted to leaving the present moment. And little by little, invisible tiredness begins growing inside the body. This exhaustion is difficult to explain because it does not always look dramatic. It often appears as low emotional energy, heaviness, restlessness, numbness, irritability, inability to relax, or the strange feeling that you are never truly here anywhere. Many people call this anxiety, But underneath anxiety is often a nervous system that has forgotten how to remain inside the present moment safely. The future-thinking mind constantly whispers, "What if something goes wrong? What if I fail? What if they leave? What if life never gets better? What if I make the wrong decision? What if I cannot handle what is coming?" These thoughts create emotional tension even before anything actually happens. The body responds to imagined danger almost the same way it responds to real danger. Stress hormones rise, muscles tighten, breathing becomes shallow. The nervous system enters survival mode repeatedly throughout the day. And because most future fears never fully resolve, the body rarely gets permission to rest deeply. This is one of the hidden costs of living ahead of the breath. The nervous system becomes trapped in permanent anticipation. There are people who spend years emotionally preparing for disasters that never arrive. They overthink every possibility because they believe constant mental preparation will protect them from suffering. But instead of safety, they create chronic emotional exhaustion. The mind says, "If I worry enough, I can prevent pain." But worrying is not the same as protection. Often it is only prolonged emotional suffering. Buddhist teachings describe this beautifully through the idea of mental attachment. The mind becomes attached not only to outcomes, but to control itself. It believes peace can only exist once uncertainty disappears. But uncertainty is woven into life permanently. No amount of future thinking can fully remove it. This realization can feel frightening at first. The mind wants guarantees, it wants certainty, it wants emotional insurance against disappointment and loss. But Buddhism gently teaches that peace does not come from controlling the future perfectly. Peace comes from learning how to remain present, even while uncertainty exists. That is a completely different way of living. Most people have never truly experienced the present moment because the mind immediately turns every moment into preparation for another one. Even joy becomes interrupted by anticipation. Someone experiences happiness and instantly thinks, "How long will this last?" Someone falls in love and immediately fears abandonment. Someone succeeds and immediately worries about failure. The mind cannot fully receive life because it is always leaning forward into the future. This creates a strange emotional starvation. People spend their entire lives trying to reach a future moment where they can finally rest. But they miss the only place rest is actually possible. Here, now, inside this breath. This does not mean ignoring responsibilities or pretending the future does not matter. Buddhist wisdom is not asking people to become careless. It is asking them to stop emotionally abandoning themselves every moment by living inside imagined futures constantly. There is a huge difference between healthy preparation and compulsive future thinking. Healthy preparation ends. Compulsive anticipation never does. One creates readiness. The other creates exhaustion. Many people no longer know how to simply exist without mentally racing ahead. Silence feels uncomfortable because the mind immediately fills empty space with future worries. This is why people often reach for distractions automatically. Phones, television, noise, endless stimulation. Not because they are weak, but because stillness forces them to meet the anxious future thinking that has been quietly running underneath everything, and yet the future never truly arrives the way the mind imagines it. When tomorrow finally comes, it becomes another present moment. Then the mind immediately jumps ahead again. Another worry, another fear, another imagined scenario. This endless movement creates emotional fragmentation. The mind becomes scattered across hundreds of imagined moments instead of rooted in the life already happening. The breath suffers first. When people live ahead of themselves constantly, breathing changes. It becomes shallow, rushed, unconscious. The body mirrors the emotional state of the mind. A future-focused mind creates a tense body. Shoulders tighten, the jaw hardens. Sleep becomes restless. Digestion weakens. Fatigue deepens. Many people believe they are simply tired from life, when part of their exhaustion comes from spending years emotionally bracing for futures that do not yet exist. This is why Buddhist meditation often begins with the breath. Not because breathing itself is magical, but because the breath interrupts mental time travel. It returns awareness to something real instead of imagined. Right now, this breath is real. This room is real. This moment is real. Tomorrow is still a thought, but the future-thinking mind resists this deeply. It believes staying present means becoming vulnerable. It fears that if it stops anticipating danger, life will suddenly collapse. So it keeps scanning ahead, trying to solve uncertainty before uncertainty arrives. Yet, ironically, this constant anticipation often creates the very emotional suffering people are trying to avoid. The body never fully relaxes. The mind never fully lands. Peace always remains postponed. This creates invisible grief inside many people. They feel disconnected from their own lives without fully understanding why. Days blur together. Moments pass unnoticed. Time feels fast and emotionally empty because the mind was never truly present for any of it. People eat meals without tasting them. Conversations happen without full listening. Nature goes unnoticed. Music becomes background noise. Even rest becomes incomplete because the mind is already living tomorrow before tonight has ended. Buddhist wisdom gently reminds us that life can only ever be experienced now. Not eventually, not after perfect certainty arrives, not after every problem disappears, now. And this realization can feel both painful and freeing at the same time. Painful because it reveals how often the mind abandons the present. Freeing because it means peace was never hidden somewhere in the future after all. It was buried underneath constant mental movement. Many people are emotionally exhausted because they have not truly arrived inside their own life in years. They are surviving mentally, not living consciously. The future has become their permanent emotional residence. But there is a quieter way to exist. A way where the breath becomes an anchor instead of an afterthought. A way where uncertainty no longer controls the nervous system completely. A way where moments are allowed to unfold without immediately being turned into future fear. This shift begins slowly. First, you notice how often your mind leaves the present moment. You notice how quickly future thinking appears whenever silence arrives. You begin recognizing the physical sensation of anticipation inside your body. The tightening, the rushing, the shallow breathing. The emotional pressure. Awareness changes everything because unconscious habits lose power once they are clearly seen. Gradually, the breath becomes something more than automatic survival. It becomes a return point. Every conscious breath reminds the nervous system that this moment is safe enough to inhabit fully. Not perfect, not guaranteed, not permanently secure, but here. That changes the emotional experience of life completely. The future still exists, but it no longer consumes every ounce of emotional energy before it arrives. Problems still exist, but the mind no longer rehearses suffering every second of the day. And something unexpected begins happening. Emotional energy slowly returns. Not because life became easier overnight, but because the nervous system stopped carrying hundreds of imaginary futures at once. This is why presence feels restorative in ways distraction never can. Presence allows the body to stop preparing for life constantly and simply experience it directly. A cup of tea becomes enough for a moment. A quiet walk becomes real again. Breathing deeply becomes possible again. Silence stops feeling like danger. And perhaps this is one of the deepest forms of healing Buddhism offers. not escape from uncertainty, but freedom from constantly living ahead of yourself. The future-thinking mind always says, later you can rest. Later you can breathe. Later you can feel peace. But life keeps unfolding while the mind waits for permission to arrive. Eventually, you begin understanding something profound. Peace is not found by reaching the future perfectly prepared. Peace is found by no longer abandoning this breath while chasing tomorrow. And slowly, the exhaustion begins softening, not because uncertainty disappears, but because you stop carrying tomorrow before it arrives. The exhaustion begins to soften when the mind stops carrying tomorrow before it arrives. But even after future thinking quiets down, many people still discover something painful. They rest for hours and still feel drained. They sleep, scroll, stay in bed, avoid responsibilities, disconnect from people, cancel plans, and tell themselves they are taking a break. Yet something inside them never truly recovers. Because sometimes rest is not actually rest. Sometimes it is escape wearing the clothes of rest. And the body knows the difference, even when the mind pretends not to. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep alone cannot fix. A person can spend an entire weekend doing almost nothing and still wake up Monday feeling emotionally heavy. They may lie in bed for hours, watch videos endlessly, avoid difficult conversations, ignore responsibilities, stay disconnected from themselves, and call it rest. But underneath the stillness, the mind is not truly relaxing. It is hiding. Buddhist wisdom teaches that true rest is not simply the absence of movement. True rest happens when the mind is no longer running away from itself. This is why some people can take vacations and still feel exhausted. They change locations, but they bring the same restless mind with them. The scenery changes, yet the emotional heaviness follows quietly inside. Because exhaustion is not always created by activity. Sometimes it is created by avoidance. Avoidance is exhausting because the nervous system must constantly work to keep uncomfortable truths buried beneath distraction. A person avoids grief by staying busy, avoids loneliness by scrolling endlessly, avoids fear through constant entertainment, avoids difficult emotions by sleeping excessively, avoids uncertainty through numbness, avoids inner emptiness through noise. And at first, these behaviors feel soothing. The mind says, I just need to relax. But often, what looks like rest is actually emotional postponement. The painful part is that avoidance creates temporary relief while secretly deepening exhaustion underneath. This happens because unresolved emotions do not disappear, simply because attention moves away from them. The nervous system still carries them quietly in the background. A person may distract themselves for hours, but the emotional tension remains stored inside the body. That is why some people feel strangely anxious during moments that are supposed to feel restful. They finally stop moving, but instead of peace, discomfort rises immediately. Restlessness appears. The urge to check the phone returns. Silence feels unbearable. The mind begins searching for stimulation again because stillness threatens to reveal what has been avoided for too long. Buddhism understands this deeply. The mind fears stillness because stillness removes distractions between you and your inner world. When noise disappears, unresolved pain becomes easier to hear. This is why many people unconsciously stay overstimulated. Constant input protects them from emotional confrontation. Music always playing, videos always running, notifications always arriving, endless scrolling before sleep, endless consumption throughout the day. The modern world makes avoidance incredibly easy. And because distraction is socially normal, people rarely notice when rest has quietly turned into emotional escape. You can feel the difference in your body. Real rest softens the nervous system. The breath deepens naturally. The body feels lighter afterward. Awareness becomes clearer, but avoidance-based rest leaves a strange emotional fog behind. Hours disappear, yet the exhaustion remains untouched. Sometimes it even grows heavier. This confuses many people because they believe they are resting properly, but internally, the mind never stopped running. It only changed direction. Instead of running toward productivity or future worries, it runs away from uncomfortable emotions. The nervous system still stays activated underneath the distraction. A person may spend an entire evening watching videos, not because they genuinely enjoy them, but because silence feels emotionally dangerous. Another person sleeps excessively because waking life feels emotionally overwhelming. Someone else isolates themselves because facing people requires emotional energy they no longer feel capable of carrying. And beneath all of this is often one painful truth. The mind is trying to avoid what it does not know how to face gently. This avoidance becomes deeply exhausting because the body was never meant to carry unresolved emotional weight indefinitely. Emotions that are continually avoided do not disappear. They remain active underneath awareness, influencing mood, energy, tension, sleep, attention, and emotional stability. The body remembers what the mind tries to escape. This is why people sometimes break down emotionally during quiet moments that seem completely ordinary. A small trigger suddenly releases weeks, months, or years of suppressed exhaustion. Tears appear unexpectedly. Anger surfaces intensely. Anxiety becomes overwhelming. Not because the moment itself caused everything, but because the nervous system was already overloaded from carrying avoided emotions silently for too long. Buddhist wisdom does not teach people to force themselves into painful emotions aggressively. It teaches gentle awareness, compassionate honesty, the willingness to stop abandoning yourself through constant escape. There is an enormous difference between healthy rest and unconscious avoidance. Healthy rest restores connection with yourself. Avoidance disconnects you further. Healthy rest creates presence. Avoidance creates numbness. Healthy rest allows emotions to breathe. Avoidance traps emotions beneath distraction. One heals exhaustion, the other prolongs it quietly. Many people learned avoidance very early in life without realizing it. They grew up in environments where emotions felt unsafe, inconvenient, or overwhelming. Sadness had to be hidden, fear had to be ignored, anger had to stay silent, vulnerability felt dangerous, so the nervous system adapted by escaping inwardly. Some people became chronic overthinkers, some became perfectionists, some became emotionally numb, some became endlessly distracted, some became addicted to busyness, some disappeared into fantasy and entertainment. All of these can become forms of emotional avoidance. And because the behaviors become habitual, people often mistake them for personality traits instead of survival responses. The body, however, continues carrying the emotional cost. This is why emotional exhaustion often feels mysterious. People think, "But I am resting all the time." Yet internally, the nervous system never experiences true restoration because the mind remains emotionally disconnected from itself. A person lies in bed physically resting while mentally avoiding grief. Another sits silently while emotionally running from loneliness. Someone else scrolls endlessly to avoid hearing their own thoughts. The body stops moving, but the emotional avoidance continues actively underneath. Buddhism teaches that suffering deepens when awareness disappears, not because emotions themselves are dangerous, but because unconscious avoidance keeps the mind fragmented. The person becomes disconnected from their own inner experience, and eventually that disconnection creates profound fatigue. There is something deeply tiring about constantly pretending not to know what hurts. Many people sense exactly what they are avoiding, but they keep turning away from it because they fear what they might feel if they stop distracting themselves. They fear grief will consume them. They fear sadness will never end. They fear loneliness will become unbearable. So they keep reaching for escape. But emotional avoidance creates a painful paradox. The more people run from their emotions, the more emotionally exhausted they become. This happens because emotional suppression requires energy. Constantly pushing feelings away forces the nervous system into chronic tension. The body stays emotionally guarded all the time. Muscles tighten unconsciously. Breathing becomes shallow. Awareness narrows. Emotional numbness increases. Eventually, the person loses access not only to painful emotions, but also to joy, peace, curiosity, softness, and connection. Numbness spreads across everything. This is one reason many emotionally exhausted people no longer know what they truly feel. They only know they feel tired. Tired of thinking, tired of carrying, tired of pretending, tired of functioning, tired of avoiding. And underneath that exhaustion is often an inner self, quietly waiting to be acknowledged instead of escaped. Buddhist practice gently invites people back toward what they keep running from, not to punish them, but to free them. Because healing begins when awareness returns. Awareness says, this sadness exists, this fear exists, this loneliness exists, this grief exists. Not with judgment, not with panic, not with self-hatred, simply honest presence. That presence changes the nervous system profoundly. The body no longer has to waste energy hiding from itself constantly. This is why emotional release often feels strangely relieving even when tears are involved. The relief comes from no longer resisting inner reality so aggressively. The nervous system softens because the emotional war briefly stops. Many people are terrified that if they stop distracting themselves, they will collapse emotionally. But often, what actually collapses is the exhausting effort of avoidance itself. There is deep exhaustion in constantly carrying emotional armor, always staying distracted, always staying busy, always staying numb, always staying entertained, always staying mentally elsewhere. Eventually, the soul becomes tired of running, and sometimes that exhaustion is actually an invitation. Not an invitation to give up, but an invitation to finally stop escaping yourself. This can begin very quietly, a moment where you sit without reaching for distraction immediately. A moment where you notice your sadness without trying to fix it instantly. A moment where you breathe fully instead of mentally fleeing into stimulation. A moment where you admit, I am hurting. These small moments matter deeply because they rebuild connection between awareness and the inner self. Buddhist wisdom teaches that peace cannot grow where awareness is constantly abandoned. The present moment becomes unbearable when the mind refuses to stay with itself compassionately. This is why meditation feels difficult for many people initially. Stillness removes escape routes. The mind suddenly notices how restless it has become. Thoughts rush faster, emotions surface, discomfort appears, but the discomfort was already there before meditation began. Stillness simply reveals it. And that revelation can become the beginning of healing. Because once suffering is clearly seen, it no longer controls the nervous system unconsciously in the same way. Many people spend years searching for rest while unknowingly avoiding the exact inner experiences that need compassionate attention. They wait for exhaustion to disappear through distraction alone. But distraction cannot resolve emotional disconnection. Only awareness can do that. Not harsh awareness, not forceful confrontation, gentle awareness, the kind that says, you do not need to run right now. You do not need to hide from yourself. You do not need to earn rest by escaping your emotions first. This softness matters because emotionally exhausted people are often already carrying enormous inner pressure. The nervous system does not heal through self-attack. It heals through safety. And safety begins when the mind no longer treats inner emotions like enemies that must be avoided at all costs. This changes rest completely. Rest stops being unconscious escape and becomes conscious restoration. Silence no longer feels threatening every moment. Breathing becomes slower. The body softens. The mind no longer needs constant stimulation just to avoid emotional contact with itself. And slowly, real energy begins returning, not the frantic energy of distraction, not temporary dopamine spikes, not emotional numbness pretending to be calm. Real energy, the kind that comes when the nervous system no longer spends every second running from unresolved pain. This does not mean difficult emotions disappear forever. Life still brings uncertainty, sadness, disappointment, grief, loneliness, and fear. Buddhism never promises permanent emotional perfection. What changes is the relationship to those emotions. Instead of immediately escaping them, awareness learns how to stay present gently. That changes exhaustion at its root, because the deepest rest is not found in distraction. It is found in no longer needing to abandon yourself in order to survive your own mind. And perhaps this is why so many people still feel tired after doing nothing all day. The body may have stopped moving, but internally the nervous system was still running from silence, running from grief, running from uncertainty, running from loneliness, running from inner truth. Eventually, the body grows tired of carrying so much avoidance, and maybe healing begins in a very simple place. Not by forcing yourself to become productive again immediately, not by judging your exhaustion, but by becoming honest about what your mind has been trying so hard not to feel. Because once awareness returns, the running slowly begins to stop, and for the first time in a long time, rest finally becomes rest. Real rest begins when the mind stops running from itself. But once the noise slows down and the distractions become quieter, something deeper often rises to the surface. Feelings that were never fully felt, sadness that was swallowed too quickly, fear hidden beneath busyness, anger buried under silence, disappointment carried for so long it became part of the personality itself. And without realizing it, many people spend years carrying emotions their body was never allowed to release. Some feelings do not disappear when they are ignored. They simply become heavier. There are emotions people allow themselves to feel openly, and there are emotions they quietly bury because they seem too uncomfortable, too inconvenient, too painful, or too dangerous to face directly. But the body remembers every feeling the mind refuses to acknowledge. It stores them silently in the nervous system, in the muscles, in the breath, in the heart, in the exhaustion that follows people through ordinary days without explanation. This is one of the deepest truths Buddhist wisdom reveals. Suffering does not only come from painful experiences themselves, it also comes from the resistance to fully feeling what those experiences awaken inside us. Many people are emotionally exhausted not because they feel too much, but because they spend enormous energy trying not to feel at all. A person loses someone they love, but immediately tells themselves to stay strong. Another experiences heartbreak, but distracts themselves before grief can fully surface. Someone feels afraid, but hides it behind humor or productivity. Another feels angry, but pushes it down because they fear conflict or rejection. And slowly, all of these unfelt emotions begin collecting inside the body like invisible weight. At first, suppression can feel useful. The mind believes it is protecting itself. It says, now is not the time to cry. I need to keep functioning. I cannot fall apart. Nobody wants to hear this. I should be over this already. So the emotions are pushed deeper. But emotions do not vanish simply because awareness looks away from them. They remain active beneath the surface, influencing the nervous system constantly. Sadness becomes heaviness. Fear becomes anxiety. Suppressed anger becomes tension. Disappointment becomes numbness. The body carries emotional truths the conscious mind refuses to fully admit. This is why emotional exhaustion often feels impossible to explain. The person may not even know exactly what they are carrying anymore. They only know they feel tired all the time, tired emotionally, tired mentally, tired spiritually. Not because life is always unbearable, but because their inner world has become crowded with emotions that were never given permission to breathe. Buddhist teachings speak often about awareness because awareness allows emotions to move instead of becoming trapped. When emotions are gently noticed, they rise, shift, soften, and eventually pass naturally. But when emotions are resisted, judged, denied, or suppressed, they remain stuck inside the nervous system much longer. This creates a hidden emotional pressure that slowly drains life force over time. You can see this clearly in people who constantly say they are fine while their body quietly tells another story. Their shoulders remain tense, their sleep feels restless, their chest feels heavy, their energy disappears quickly. They feel emotionally distant from life without fully understanding why. The emotions are still there. They were simply never allowed to speak honestly. Many people learned very early in life that certain emotions were unsafe. Crying may have been mocked. Fear may have been ignored. Anger may have been punished. Vulnerability may have been treated like weakness. So the nervous system adapted by suppressing emotional expression in order to survive socially or emotionally. This adaptation often continues into adulthood unconsciously. The person no longer even notices how often they abandon their own feelings automatically. Someone gets hurt and immediately minimizes it. Someone feels overwhelmed and immediately distracts themselves. Someone feels lonely and immediately reaches for stimulation. Someone feels grief and immediately becomes productive instead. The nervous system becomes conditioned to move away from emotional truth before awareness can fully meet it, and yet the body continues carrying everything silently underneath. This is why suppressed emotions often return during quiet moments, late at night, during silence, during exhaustion, during illness, during stillness. The emotions rise because they were never truly processed. They were postponed. Buddhist wisdom teaches that emotions themselves are not the enemy. Clinging and resistance create suffering, not the simple presence of human feeling. But many people spend years fighting their own emotional reality, as if sadness, fear, or anger are personal failures instead of natural human experiences. This inner conflict creates profound fatigue. There is something deeply exhausting about constantly monitoring your own emotional life, trying to appear okay while carrying pain internally. The nervous system remains emotionally guarded all the time. The body never fully relaxes because it is always suppressing, controlling, hiding, or avoiding something underneath. No wonder peace feels distant. A person may spend years carrying sadness they never fully allowed themselves to feel. Maybe it began with disappointment, a dream that never happened, a relationship that quietly ended, a childhood need that was never met, a life path that unfolded differently than expected. But instead of grieving honestly, the mind keeps saying, "It was not a big deal. Other people have it worse. I should be grateful. I need to move on." And because the sadness never receives compassionate attention, it hardens into emotional heaviness instead. This heaviness often appears as emotional numbness. The person no longer cries easily. Joy feels distant. Life feels muted. They continue functioning externally, but internally, emotional vitality slowly fades. The tragedy is that many people mistake numbness for strength. But numbness is not peace. It is often pain that was buried too deeply for conscious awareness to reach easily anymore. Fear works similarly. Fear that is never acknowledged openly does not disappear. It transforms into chronic anxiety, overthinking, emotional control, perfectionism, or constant anticipation. A person may spend years trying to organize every detail of life perfectly without realizing they are actually trying to manage hidden fear underneath. Fear of failure, fear of abandonment, fear of uncertainty, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. The mind keeps working endlessly to avoid these feelings directly, but avoidance itself becomes exhausting. This is why emotionally exhausted people often feel like they can never truly relax. Even during rest, the nervous system remains emotionally vigilant because unresolved fear still lives underneath awareness. Anger creates another kind of emotional weight. Many people fear anger because they associate it with destruction, conflict, or rejection. So instead of expressing anger consciously and safely, they suppress it entirely. They become overly accommodating. They silence their needs. They avoid confrontation at all costs. But buried anger does not disappear peacefully. It often becomes resentment, emotional bitterness, passive aggression, irritability, or quiet emotional distance from life itself. The person may not even realize they are angry anymore because the emotion has existed inside them for so long it simply feels normal. The body, however, still carries the tension. This is why some people feel exhausted after spending time around certain relationships. Their nervous system is suppressing enormous emotional truth constantly. They smile while feeling hurt, agree while feeling angry, stay silent while feeling unseen. The emotional labor of suppression becomes physically draining. Buddhism teaches that awareness transforms suffering because awareness interrupts unconscious resistance. When emotions are met gently instead of suppressed automatically, they lose much of their hidden power over the nervous system. This does not mean becoming emotionally overwhelmed by every feeling. It means learning how to notice emotions honestly without immediately rejecting them. Sadness says, "Something mattered deeply to me." Fear says, "I feel vulnerable." Anger says, "A boundary or pain exists here." Disappointment says, "A hope inside me was hurt." When emotions are approached with curiosity instead of shame, the nervous system no longer has to fight itself constantly. This is why emotional release often creates relief even when tears are involved. Crying is not weakness. Sometimes it is the nervous system finally stopping its emotional resistance long enough for trapped energy to move. Many people cry and apologize immediately afterward because they were taught emotional expression is embarrassing. But often those tears were carrying months or years of emotional pressure the body could no longer hold silently. The body longs for honesty more than perfection. And honesty begins with admitting what hurts instead of constantly escaping it. This can feel frightening because suppressed emotions often seem larger than they really are. The mind fears that if sadness is fully felt, it will never end. It fears grief will consume everything. It fears anger will destroy relationships. So emotions remain trapped beneath constant control. But Buddhist wisdom gently teaches that emotions become heavier when imprisoned. An emotion fully acknowledged with awareness often moves naturally through the body. An emotion denied repeatedly tends to stay stuck much longer. This changes how healing is understood completely. Healing is not becoming emotionless. Healing is becoming emotionally honest without drowning in resistance. Many emotionally exhausted people are not weak. They are carrying years of emotional suppression silently, years of pretending, years of functioning while disconnected from their real inner experience. Eventually, the nervous system grows tired of carrying what was never allowed to move. This is why burnout is often emotional before it becomes physical. The body eventually signals that something unresolved inside can no longer remain buried indefinitely. Sometimes this appears as chronic fatigue, sometimes as anxiety, sometimes as emotional numbness, sometimes as sudden breakdowns, sometimes as inability to focus, sometimes as unexplained sadness. The symptoms vary, but underneath them is often the same truth. The inner world has been neglected for too long. Buddhist mindfulness creates healing because it reconnects awareness to emotional reality gently, not through force, not through judgment, through presence. Presence says, this sadness exists right now. This fear is here. This disappointment hurts. This anger needs attention, without panic, without shame, without self-attack. This compassionate awareness softens emotional resistance. The nervous system finally receives permission to stop suppressing every feeling constantly, and slowly, emotional energy begins returning. Not because difficult emotions disappear forever, but because the body no longer wastes enormous energy hiding from them. There is deep freedom in no longer needing to pretend you are unaffected by everything. You stop performing emotional invincibility. You stop treating vulnerability like failure. You stop abandoning yourself emotionally just to appear okay externally. And perhaps for the first time in a very long time, your inner world begins feeling less like a battlefield. This changes relationships too. When people suppress emotions constantly, connection becomes difficult because true intimacy requires emotional presence. A person disconnected from their own feelings often struggles to feel fully connected to others as well. Conversations remain surface level. Love feels distant. Loneliness deepens quietly. Even joy feels incomplete. But when emotional awareness returns, connection deepens naturally because the person is no longer emotionally absent from their own life. This is one reason Buddhist compassion matters so deeply. Compassion softens the harsh inner judgment that keeps emotions buried. Many people suppress feelings not because the emotions are unbearable, but because they judge themselves for having them at all. They think, I should not feel this way. I should be stronger. I should be over this. But healing rarely grows inside shame. It grows inside gentle awareness, the kind that allows emotions to exist without immediately trying to erase them. This does not mean staying trapped in suffering endlessly. It means allowing emotions to complete their natural movement instead of interrupting them through suppression constantly. A wave fully allowed eventually passes. A wave resisted endlessly feels permanent, and perhaps this is why emotional exhaustion feels so heavy for so many people. They are not only carrying life itself, they are carrying all the feelings they never fully allowed themselves to feel honestly. Every suppressed disappointment, every hidden fear, every buried sadness, every unspoken grief, every silent anger. The nervous system keeps holding all of it quietly until one day the exhaustion finally says, this is too heavy to carry alone anymore. And maybe that moment is not failure. Maybe it is the beginning of emotional truth, the beginning of no longer abandoning your inner world through silence, distraction, or suppression. The beginning of allowing feelings to breathe instead of imprisoning them inside your body forever. Because emotions are not meant to become permanent weight. They are meant to move. And slowly, when awareness becomes gentle enough, they finally begin to. As emotions begin moving instead of remaining trapped inside the body, another layer of exhaustion slowly reveals itself. A quieter tension, one that sits underneath overthinking, fear, sadness, and emotional fatigue. The tension of trying to control life so tightly that the nervous system never truly rests. Many people are not only tired from what they feel, they are tired from constantly trying to force reality to unfold a certain way. And the heart becomes exhausted when it spends too long fighting uncertainty. There is a hidden kind of suffering that grows every time the mind says, "Things must happen the way I want, or I cannot feel at peace." At first, this sounds reasonable. After all, everybody wants good outcomes. Everybody wants love to stay, plans to work, people to understand them, efforts to succeed, and life to feel stable. But Buddhism gently reveals something painful. The tighter the mind clings to controlling outcomes, the more restless the nervous system becomes. Because life refuses to stay fully controllable, this creates a silent war inside many people. They are constantly trying to predict, manage, secure, prevent, fix, or guarantee things that exist far beyond their complete control. And even when the body appears calm externally, the nervous system remains emotionally tense underneath. This tension slowly becomes exhaustion. A person checks their phone repeatedly because they want certainty about someone's feelings. Another overthinks every decision because they fear making the wrong choice. Someone else mentally rehearses conversations over and over because they want to control how others perceive them. Another becomes emotionally consumed by future plans because uncertainty feels unbearable. The mind believes control will create safety, but often the desperate need for control becomes the very thing destroying inner peace. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment is one of the deepest roots of suffering. Many people misunderstand attachment as simply loving people too much or wanting material things. But attachment often means something far deeper. It means emotionally depending on specific outcomes in order to feel okay internally. I need this relationship to work. I need people to approve of me. I need certainty before I can relax. I need life to go according to plan. I need this fear to disappear. I need things to stay the same. And because life itself is constantly changing, the nervous system becomes trapped in chronic tension, trying to hold reality still. This is one reason emotionally exhausted people often struggle to fully relax. The mind never stops scanning for what could go wrong. It constantly monitors the future, relationships, decisions, emotions, finances, health, and possibilities. The body may sit still, but internally, the nervous system is gripping life tightly every moment. That gripping becomes heavy. You can feel it physically. The chest tightens. Sleep becomes shallow. Thoughts race endlessly. The jaw hardens without noticing, shoulders stay tense, breathing becomes restricted. The body behaves as if danger is always nearby, because psychologically the mind is trying to control uncertainty constantly, and uncertainty never fully disappears. This creates enormous emotional fatigue, because the nervous system never receives permission to soften completely. Buddhism does not teach people to stop caring about life. It teaches something much more difficult: to care deeply without emotionally collapsing when reality refuses to obey personal expectations. That balance changes everything. Most suffering does not come only from events themselves. It comes from the mind's refusal to accept that some things cannot be forced into certainty. People exhaust themselves trying to control how others feel, how quickly healing happens, how life unfolds, how the future turns out, or whether pain will ever return. But control is often an illusion the anxious mind clings to for emotional safety. This becomes especially painful in relationships. Many people spend enormous emotional energy trying to secure love permanently. They monitor messages, analyze behavior, overthink distance, search for reassurance, or mentally predict abandonment before it happens. The attachment to keeping love safe creates constant nervous system tension, and ironically, this tension often destroys the peace they were trying to protect. The mind says, if I can just know for certain, I will relax. If I can prevent rejection, I will feel safe. If I can control the future, I will stop suffering. But the future remains uncertain no matter how intensely the mind grips it. This realization can feel terrifying because the human nervous system craves stability deeply. Uncertainty feels vulnerable. It reminds people they are not fully in control of life, love, health, aging, loss, or time itself. So the mind compensates by tightening around plans, tightening around people, tightening around identity, tightening around outcomes, tightening around fear, and eventually the tightening itself becomes exhausting. This is why people often feel emotionally drained after long periods of overthinking. The mind has been attempting to solve uncertainty through mental control, but uncertainty cannot be fully solved. Life is fluid. Human beings are unpredictable. Change is inevitable. The nervous system suffers when it treats uncertainty like an emergency instead of a natural condition of being alive. Buddhist wisdom speaks often about impermanence because impermanence sits underneath all emotional attachment. Everything changes, relationships change, emotions change, bodies change, circumstances change, seasons change, thoughts change, even identity changes continuously. The mind resists this truth because permanence feels emotionally safer. People want guarantees, permanent love, permanent security, permanent happiness, permanent certainty. But life was never designed to remain frozen. And when the mind demands permanence from an impermanent world, suffering grows quietly. This suffering often hides inside perfectionism. Many perfectionists are not simply trying to achieve excellence. They are trying to eliminate uncertainty emotionally. If they can do everything perfectly, maybe they can avoid criticism, rejection, failure, shame, or pain. But perfection is impossible because life itself is imperfect and constantly moving. So the nervous system remains trapped in endless pressure, always improving, always fixing, always anticipating mistakes, always trying harder. The body becomes exhausted not only from effort, but from the emotional fear underneath the effort. Fear of losing control. This fear affects even ordinary moments. Someone cannot enjoy dinner because they are already worrying about tomorrow. Someone cannot rest because unfinished possibilities keep replaying mentally. Someone cannot experience peace because their mind keeps asking, but what if this goes wrong later? The future steals the present moment again and again through attachment to control. Buddhism gently teaches something radically different. Peace is not found through controlling life perfectly. Peace begins when the nervous system no longer depends on controlling everything in order to feel safe internally. This does not mean becoming careless or passive. It means recognizing the limits of control honestly. You can guide your actions, you can choose your intentions, you can care deeply, you can prepare wisely, but you cannot fully control outcomes. You cannot fully control how people feel. You cannot fully control time. You cannot fully control loss. You cannot fully control uncertainty. You cannot fully control life itself. And strangely, this truth becomes freeing once the nervous system stops fighting it constantly, because attachment to control creates endless emotional labor. The mind becomes responsible for managing impossible levels of certainty. It tries to hold the entire future together mentally. No human nervous system can carry that weight forever. This is why surrender is such an important Buddhist teaching, though many people misunderstand surrender completely. Surrender is not giving up on life. It is releasing the exhausting illusion that peace depends on controlling everything perfectly. Surrender says, I will do what I can with awareness, but I will not destroy my nervous system trying to force certainty from life. That softening changes emotional exhaustion profoundly. The body begins relaxing when it no longer treats every unknown outcome like danger. Breathing deepens, thoughts slow slightly, emotional energy stops leaking into constant control attempts, and for the first time in a long time, the heart experiences moments of genuine rest. Many emotionally exhausted people do not realize how much of their suffering comes from invisible attachment. Attachment to being understood, attachment to avoiding pain, attachment to achieving certain futures, attachment to specific emotional outcomes. When reality does not match those expectations, the nervous system reacts with tension immediately. But Buddhist awareness interrupts this unconscious gripping. You begin noticing how quickly the mind tightens around fear, how quickly it tries to control uncertainty, how quickly it demands guarantees before allowing peace. This awareness creates space between the mind and its attachment patterns, and in that space, something gentle begins happening. You stop needing certainty quite so desperately. Not because uncertainty suddenly becomes enjoyable, but because you realize the constant attempt to eliminate uncertainty is exhausting you more than uncertainty itself. This is an enormous shift. Most people think their suffering comes from uncertainty. Often, part of their suffering actually comes from resisting uncertainty constantly. The resistance becomes heavier than the unknown itself. You can see this in people who obsessively seek reassurance. No amount of reassurance fully satisfies them because the deeper issue is not information. It is attachment to certainty. The mind keeps searching for one final answer that will permanently remove emotional discomfort. But life does not provide permanent emotional guarantees, so the nervous system stays restless. Buddhist teachings invite people into a different relationship with life, one where peace does not depend entirely on outcomes, one where the present moment matters more than endless future control, one where uncertainty can exist without completely dominating the heart. This does not happen overnight. The nervous system has often spent years learning fear-based control patterns. Letting go feels vulnerable at first because the mind mistakes control for protection, but eventually something becomes clear. Control never truly created peace. It only created temporary emotional management. Real peace begins when the nervous system learns it can survive uncertainty without collapsing internally. That realization changes how life feels. A conversation no longer requires endless over-analysis. A delayed message no longer destroys emotional stability completely. A future plan no longer determines your entire sense of safety. An uncertain outcome no longer consumes every thought. The heart becomes softer because it is no longer gripping reality so tightly. And this softness matters deeply, because emotionally exhausted people are often carrying invisible tension every second of the day. Tension around relationships, around money, around identity, around the future, around healing, around being enough. The body absorbs all of it. Eventually, exhaustion becomes the nervous system's way of saying, you cannot keep holding life this tightly forever. And perhaps healing begins not by controlling more, but by loosening the grip slightly. One breath where you stop demanding certainty immediately. One moment where you allow life to remain unfinished. One conversation where you stop trying to control how you are perceived. One quiet acceptance that not everything can be solved perfectly today. These moments seem small, but they teach the nervous system something new. You are allowed to exist without controlling everything constantly. This creates emotional freedom slowly, not because life becomes predictable, not because pain disappears permanently, but because the heart stops exhausting itself, trying to force reality into permanent certainty. And maybe this is one of the deepest reasons so many people feel tired all the time. Their nervous system has spent years holding on to outcomes too tightly. trying to secure love, trying to secure safety, trying to secure identity, trying to secure the future. But life keeps changing anyway. Eventually, the exhausted heart begins learning a quieter truth. Peace was never hiding inside perfect control. It was waiting underneath the grip. The heart becomes lighter when it stops gripping life so tightly. But even after attachment softens, many people still carry another invisible burden they rarely notice. A constant stream of inner noise, endless thoughts moving through the mind from morning until night. Commentary, judgment, comparison, worry, analysis, self-criticism, imagined conversations, silent fears, mental rehearsals. And after a while, the mind becomes so loud that the body starts feeling tired too. Some people are not exhausted because life is physically demanding. They are exhausted because their inner world never becomes quiet. There is a kind of tiredness that sleep cannot fix because it does not begin in the body. It begins in the mind. A person wakes up already thinking. Before the day fully starts, the inner voice is already active. It begins evaluating, remembering, planning, comparing, worrying, predicting, criticizing. The body may still be lying in bed, but mentally, the nervous system has already started running, and it keeps running all day. This is one of the most overlooked causes of emotional exhaustion. Mental noise, not just occasional thinking, but constant inner movement that never fully stops long enough for the nervous system to recover. Buddhist wisdom teaches that the untamed mind creates enormous suffering because it constantly pulls awareness away from direct experience into endless mental activity. Most people live almost entirely inside thought without realizing how much energy thought itself consumes. Every judgment drains attention. Every worry drains calm. Every comparison drains self-worth. Every mental argument drains peace. Every repetitive thought pulls energy away from presence. And because these thoughts happen automatically, people rarely notice how exhausting their own inner dialogue has become. The mind becomes like a crowded room where dozens of voices speak at once. One voice worries about the future. Another criticizes the past. Another compares your life to others. Another fears rejection. Another questions your decisions. Another predicts failure. Another demands perfection. The nervous system listens to all of it continuously. No wonder the body feels tired even after doing very little physically. Mental noise is exhausting because the brain treats many thoughts as emotionally real experiences. When a person repeatedly worries, judges themselves, imagines conflict or replays fear, the nervous system reacts as if those situations are happening right now. The heart rate changes. The breath shortens. Stress hormones increase. Muscles tighten. The body prepares for emotional danger. And because mental noise often lasts for hours, days, or years, the nervous system remains under chronic internal pressure. Many people do not realize how aggressive their inner world has become. They think exhaustion only comes from work, responsibilities, or difficult circumstances. But some people are living with non-stop psychological pressure inside their own mind every waking moment. A person may look calm externally while internally thinking, "You are falling behind. What if everything goes wrong? Why are you like this? You should be doing more." They probably do not care about you. You are wasting time. Everyone else is doing better. This constant inner commentary slowly drains emotional life force from the inside. Buddhism often compares the untrained mind to a restless monkey jumping endlessly from branch to branch. One thought becomes another instantly. One fear becomes another worry. One comparison becomes another judgment. The mind rarely stays still long enough to experience peace directly. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable for many people. Once external noise disappears, internal noise becomes easier to hear. The person suddenly notices how much they criticize themselves, how much they fear the future, how much they compare their life, how much they mentally rehearse problems, how little rest their mind actually experiences. Mental noise becomes especially exhausting because it often feels necessary. People believe constant thinking is helping them survive emotionally. They believe over-analyzing prevents mistakes. They believe worrying keeps them prepared. They believe self-criticism improves performance. But often, these thought patterns create more suffering than protection. The mind becomes addicted to activity because stillness feels unfamiliar. This is why many emotionally exhausted people struggle to simply sit quietly without stimulation. The moment silence appears, thoughts rush in immediately. The nervous system has become conditioned to constant internal movement, and modern life intensifies this dramatically. Phones, notifications, social media, endless information, constant comparison, non-stop content. The mind rarely receives uninterrupted stillness anymore. Even moments of rest become filled with input. Scrolling while eating, watching videos while lying down, checking notifications during conversations, falling asleep to noise. The nervous system never fully resets because awareness is continuously crowded. This overstimulation weakens emotional clarity. The mind becomes fragmented across thousands of thoughts, images, fears, and comparisons every day. And eventually the body begins carrying the fatigue of mental overload physically. This is why emotional exhaustion often feels like physical heaviness. The brain consumes enormous energy during continuous mental activity. But beyond biology, mental noise creates emotional tension that the body absorbs directly. A person who constantly worries eventually feels drained physically. A person who constantly compares themselves feels emotionally depleted. A person trapped in self-judgment feels heavy without knowing why. The body cannot fully relax while the mind continues attacking itself internally. One of the loudest forms of mental noise is self-judgment. Many people speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to another human being. Constant criticism becomes normal. The mind comments on everything. You are not productive enough. You should be better by now. You always ruin things. You are too emotional. You are failing. You are not enough. This inner hostility creates profound nervous system exhaustion because the body experiences self-judgment as emotional threat. The nervous system does not fully distinguish between external attack and internal attack. Harsh inner commentary activates stress responses repeatedly throughout the day, and because the criticism comes from inside, there is nowhere to escape from it. Some people have lived with this inner voice for so long they no longer notice how cruel it has become. They think it is motivation. But constant self-attack rarely creates peace. It creates emotional depletion. Comparison creates another layer of mental exhaustion. The comparing mind never rests because there will always be someone richer, happier, more attractive, more successful, more loved, more confident, or more accomplished. Social media intensifies this constantly by exposing people to endless, carefully edited versions of other lives. The mind begins measuring itself automatically. They are ahead. They are happier. They have what I do not. My life should look different. And each comparison quietly steals emotional energy. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering increases when the mind becomes attached to measuring reality constantly instead of experiencing it directly. Comparison pulls awareness away from the life already unfolding and into imagined emotional rankings. The result is chronic dissatisfaction. Even beautiful moments become interrupted by mental evaluation. A person cannot enjoy their own progress because the mind immediately searches for someone doing better, cannot enjoy rest because the mind says they should be accomplishing more, cannot feel enough because the mind constantly moves the standard further away. This endless measuring creates invisible exhaustion. Worry creates another form of mental noise that deeply affects the nervous system. Worry feels productive because the mind mistakes mental preparation for emotional safety. But many worries simply replay uncertainty without resolution. The mind circles endlessly. What if this happens? What if I fail? What if they leave? What if something goes wrong? And because most worries have no immediate answer, the nervous system remains trapped in unresolved tension. Worry becomes especially exhausting because it rarely stays contained to one issue. One fear triggers another. One uncertainty creates 10 more imagined problems. The mind spirals into endless scenarios. Meanwhile, the body continues absorbing the stress physically. This is why chronic overthinkers often feel tired, even after doing very little externally. Their nervous system has been emotionally running all day long. Mental noise also disconnects people from the present moment completely. Someone drinks coffee without tasting it because they are mentally elsewhere, walks through nature without noticing it, listens during conversations without fully hearing, lies in bed while mentally rehearsing tomorrow. Life becomes filtered through non-stop thought instead of directly experienced. Buddhism gently points towards something many people have forgotten. Peace is not found by controlling every thought. Peace begins when awareness no longer becomes trapped inside every thought automatically. Thoughts are not always truth. Not every mental voice deserves belief. Not every fear deserves complete surrender. This awareness changes everything. Because once people begin observing thoughts instead of immediately becoming consumed by them, the nervous system starts experiencing moments of space again. Space between thoughts, space between reactions, space between fear and awareness. And inside that space, exhaustion begins softening slightly. This is why mindfulness matters so deeply in Buddhist practice. Mindfulness interrupts unconscious mental momentum. It brings awareness back to direct experience instead of endless internal commentary. The breath, the body, the sounds in the room, the feeling of sunlight, the sensation of walking, the quietness underneath thought. These simple experiences reconnect the nervous system to reality instead of mental noise constantly. Many emotionally exhausted people have not truly rested mentally in years. Even during sleep, the mind remains overstimulated, dreams become stressful, sleep becomes shallow, the nervous system stays alert underneath. This creates a deep emotional fatigue that builds slowly over time. And perhaps the saddest part is that many people blame themselves for this exhaustion. They call themselves lazy, weak, unmotivated or broken, when in reality they are carrying non-stop psychological noise every moment of the day. Anyone would feel tired living inside constant mental pressure. Buddhist teachings do not ask people to force the mind into silence aggressively. Fighting thoughts usually creates even more inner conflict. Instead, awareness learns to observe mental activity without attaching to every single thought emotionally. A thought appears. Awareness notices it. The thought passes without immediately believing it completely, without building entire emotional worlds around it, without feeding it endlessly. This softens mental exhaustion because the nervous system no longer becomes fully entangled with every internal voice. Over time, something surprising happens. The mind begins quieting naturally in moments, not permanently, not perfectly, but enough for the nervous system to breathe again. A person notices the sound of rain without mentally escaping somewhere else immediately. notices their breathing, feels sunlight on their skin, experiences a meal fully, listens during conversations without rehearsing responses constantly. These moments may seem ordinary, but they restore emotional energy because awareness returns to life itself instead of remaining trapped inside endless commentary. Mental noise loses power when presence deepens. This is why Buddhist stillness feels so healing to many people. Not because life becomes magically problem-free, but because awareness stops being consumed entirely by inner chaos. The nervous system finally experiences moments where it does not have to defend, compare, predict, criticize, or rehearse constantly. Moments where existence simply unfolds quietly. And perhaps this is one of the deepest forms of exhaustion modern people carry. Not only physical fatigue, but the exhaustion of never escaping their own mental commentary, the endless narration, the endless evaluation, the endless worry, the endless pressure, the endless comparison. Eventually, the mind becomes too crowded to hear peace anymore. But peace was never truly gone. It was buried underneath the noise. And healing begins when awareness slowly remembers how to listen beneath the constant mental movement. Not to force silence, not to become emotionless, not to stop thinking completely, but to finally realize that you do not have to follow every thought until exhaustion destroys your inner world. Some thoughts are simply noise, and the nervous system has been carrying too much of it for far too long. When the mind finally becomes quieter, something else begins to appear. Tiny habits that once seemed harmless. Small emotional patterns repeated so often they became invisible. Constant overthinking, the need to be liked, the habit of checking for approval, the urge to emotionally predict what others feel. None of these seem heavy at first. But over time, they quietly drain energy from the nervous system little by little, day after day, and eventually the soul begins feeling weak without understanding where all its energy went. Some exhaustion does not come from one large emotional wound. It comes from hundreds of tiny leaks happening every single day. Small mental habits that quietly pull emotional energy away from the nervous system without drawing much attention to themselves. A little worry here, a little people-pleasing there, a little overthinking before sleep, a little emotional guessing during conversations. None of these seem serious individually, but together they slowly drain the inner world like water leaking from cracks no one notices. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering is often sustained not only by dramatic events, but by unconscious habits repeated continuously. The mind becomes conditioned to leak energy through patterns it no longer questions. And because these patterns feel normal, people rarely realize how much exhaustion they create. One of the biggest energy leaks is overthinking. The overthinking mind rarely rests because it constantly revisits situations, trying to achieve emotional certainty. It analyzes conversations repeatedly, searches for hidden meanings, rehearses possibilities, predicts reactions, questions decisions, doubts itself endlessly, and every cycle consumes emotional energy. At first, overthinking feels productive. The mind believes more analysis will create more safety, but most overthinking does not create clarity. It creates emotional spinning. The nervous system stays activated because the mind never fully leaves the problem alone. Even during moments of rest, part of the brain remains emotionally occupied. This is why people sometimes feel tired after spending an hour alone with their thoughts. The body barely moved, but internally the nervous system traveled through countless emotional scenarios. Buddhism gently teaches that the mind creates suffering when it compulsively clings to thought as a source of control. Overthinking becomes an attempt to solve uncertainty emotionally through mental repetition, but uncertainty rarely disappears through analysis alone. So the mind continues circling, and circling, and circling. Meanwhile, emotional energy slowly drains away. People-pleasing creates another deep energy leak that many people do not recognize until exhaustion becomes overwhelming. A person constantly monitors how others feel. They adjust themselves to avoid disappointing anyone. They say yes when they want to say no. They hide their true feelings to maintain harmony. They become emotionally responsible for everyone around them. And over time, they lose connection with their own emotional needs completely. This habit often begins in childhood. Some people learned that love depended on being agreeable, useful, calm, helpful, or emotionally easy to handle. They discovered that conflict created emotional danger, so they adapted by becoming highly sensitive to other people's moods and expectations. The nervous system became trained to prioritize external approval over internal truth. This creates enormous emotional fatigue because the person is constantly performing emotional management. They monitor tone, monitor reactions, monitor approval, monitor acceptance, monitor disappointment. The body stays emotionally alert all the time. Even small social interactions become draining because the nervous system never fully relaxes around others. Part of the mind is always asking, are they upset? Did I say something wrong? Do they still like me? Am I disappointing them? This constant emotional scanning quietly weakens the inner world. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment to external validation creates suffering because peace becomes dependent on forces outside your control. The people-pleasing mind constantly waits for emotional permission from others before feeling okay internally. But approval is unstable. People change. Opinions change. Emotions change. And when your emotional safety depends entirely on being accepted, the nervous system becomes fragile and exhausted. This exhaustion often feels invisible because people-pleasers usually appear kind, calm, or emotionally capable on the outside. But internally, they are often deeply tired from abandoning themselves repeatedly in order to maintain connection with others. There is something profoundly exhausting about constantly shaping yourself around other people's comfort while neglecting your own inner truth. The soul becomes weak when authenticity is continuously sacrificed for acceptance. Checking for approval creates another silent energy leak. Many people do this unconsciously all day long. They check phones constantly hoping for emotional reassurance. They look for responses, validation, attention, signs of being valued. A message, a like, a reply, a compliment, a reaction. The nervous system becomes emotionally dependent on external signals to feel temporarily secure. This habit creates emotional instability because the mind continuously ties self-worth to outside responses. If someone replies quickly, relief appears. If someone seems distant, anxiety appears. If approval arrives, emotional calm briefly returns. If approval disappears, insecurity grows immediately. The nervous system becomes trapped in emotional dependence. This creates exhaustion because inner peace keeps getting outsourced to other people's behavior. Buddhist teachings remind us that attachment creates suffering precisely because external conditions constantly change. When emotional balance depends on approval, life becomes emotionally unpredictable and unstable. The person loses connection with inner groundedness. And without inner grounding, even small emotional shifts begin feeling overwhelming. Emotional guessing creates another hidden leak many people carry quietly. Some people spend enormous emotional energy trying to predict what others think or feel instead of simply remaining present. They analyze facial expressions, tones, pauses, messages, behaviors, and silence constantly. The mind becomes obsessed with interpretation. What did they mean by that? Are they upset? Did I annoy them? Are they pulling away? Do they secretly dislike me? This constant emotional decoding creates chronic nervous system tension because the mind remains hypervigilant socially. Many emotionally exhausted people are not only carrying their own emotions, they are carrying endless imagined emotional interpretations about everyone else too, and most of these interpretations are not even accurate. The anxious mind fills gaps with fear automatically. Buddhist awareness interrupts this habit by returning attention to direct reality instead of imagined emotional stories. But without awareness, emotional guessing becomes automatic. The nervous system loses enormous energy trying to emotionally solve people constantly. This happens often in relationships. Instead of asking directly, the mind begins constructing entire emotional narratives internally. A delayed message becomes rejection, quietness becomes abandonment, a small change in tone becomes emotional danger. The nervous system reacts intensely to imagined meanings, and after enough time, emotional exhaustion becomes inevitable. Another powerful energy leak is emotional suppression disguised as strength. Many people spend all day pretending they are unaffected. They force themselves to appear calm, productive, positive, or emotionally stable while carrying overwhelming internal pressure underneath. This performance consumes enormous emotional energy. The body must constantly regulate facial expressions, emotional reactions, tone, and behavior while simultaneously suppressing what is truly being felt. The nervous system never fully relaxes because authenticity feels unsafe. This creates inner division. One part of the self feels pain honestly. Another part constantly says, "Do not show it. Keep functioning. Stay composed. Do not burden anyone." The emotional split itself becomes exhausting. Buddhist teachings emphasize awareness because awareness reunites the fragmented self. Instead of endlessly suppressing emotions or performing emotional perfection, awareness allows honesty to exist gently. That honesty restores energy because the nervous system no longer wastes so much effort hiding from itself. Perfectionism creates another major leak. The perfectionistic mind constantly believes more effort will finally create emotional safety. If everything is done perfectly, maybe criticism can be avoided. Maybe rejection can be prevented. Maybe worthiness can finally be earned. So the mind remains in endless self-monitoring, always correcting, always improving, always pushing, always doubting. Perfectionism rarely creates peace because the standard keeps moving endlessly. Nothing ever feels fully enough. The nervous system stays trapped in pressure. This becomes deeply exhausting because the person never experiences emotional completion internally. Even accomplishments feel temporary. Relief disappears quickly because the mind immediately finds another flaw or another fear. The inner world becomes a place of constant evaluation instead of rest. Buddhist wisdom teaches that grasping for perfection creates suffering because life itself is imperfect, changing, and incomplete by nature. The nervous system suffers when it refuses to allow imperfection to exist peacefully. Another quiet energy leak is resentment. Many people carry small resentments daily without fully acknowledging them. Unspoken frustrations, hidden disappointments, silent emotional wounds. The person continues functioning externally while internally carrying unresolved tension toward others, life, or themselves. This emotional tension quietly consumes energy constantly. The nervous system stays emotionally contracted around unresolved hurt. Even if the resentment remains unspoken, the body still carries its weight. This is why unresolved emotional tension often feels physically heavy. The body absorbs emotional contraction directly. Buddhist compassion softens resentment not by denying pain, but by loosening the emotional grip around it. Resentment drains life force because it keeps the nervous system emotionally attached to suffering continuously. Fear of missing out creates another modern energy leak. Many people cannot fully rest because the mind constantly believes something better is happening elsewhere. Someone else is succeeding more, someone else is happier, someone else is living more fully. This creates chronic dissatisfaction with the present moment. The nervous system becomes emotionally scattered across endless imagined alternatives. Instead of inhabiting life directly, the mind keeps reaching outward toward hypothetical better experiences. This restless reaching weakens emotional presence deeply. Buddhism teaches that craving itself creates suffering because the mind continually moves away from what already exists in search of another emotional state. And the constant reaching becomes exhausting. One of the deepest energy leaks of all is self-abandonment. Every time a person ignores their own emotional truth to maintain approval, avoid discomfort, or satisfy external expectations, inner energy weakens slightly. Ignoring boundaries, ignoring exhaustion, ignoring sadness, ignoring intuition, ignoring emotional needs. The nervous system slowly loses trust in itself because awareness repeatedly turns away from inner reality. This creates deep emotional fatigue over time. Healing begins when awareness starts noticing these small leaks compassionately instead of judging them harshly. Noticing, I am overthinking again. I am searching for approval again. I am abandoning my feelings again. I am carrying emotional tension that is not mine to hold. This awareness matters because unconscious habits lose power once clearly seen. Buddhist mindfulness is not only about dramatic spiritual experiences. It is about becoming conscious of the tiny ways suffering gets recreated every day through repetitive mental and emotional habits. And slowly, something begins changing. The person pauses before spiraling into overthinking, pauses before sacrificing themselves for approval, pauses before emotionally chasing reassurance, pauses before automatically abandoning their own inner truth. These pauses protect emotional energy, because energy is not only lost through hard work or difficult events, it is often lost through unconscious emotional habits repeated thousands of times quietly. The nervous system becomes stronger when these leaks begin closing, not stronger through force, not stronger through emotional suppression, stronger through awareness. Awareness restores energy because it stops unnecessary emotional bleeding. And perhaps this is why many people feel weak without understanding why. Their emotional energy has been leaking slowly for years through habits that became invisible. Constant worry, constant comparison, constant approval seeking, constant self-monitoring, constant emotional guessing. The body keeps carrying the cost. Eventually, exhaustion becomes the soul's way of saying, you cannot continue giving your energy away this carelessly forever. And maybe healing begins not with becoming someone new, but with finally noticing where your energy has been quietly disappearing all along. Because peace is not only created through rest. Sometimes peace is created by closing the leaks that were draining you every single day. As the small leaks of emotional energy begin to reveal themselves, another truth slowly rises underneath them all. The body has been speaking quietly this entire time, through tension, through heaviness, through exhaustion, through shallow breathing, through headaches, tight shoulders, restless sleep, stomach discomfort, numbness, and fatigue. But many people became so mentally distracted that they stopped listening, and eventually the body grows tired of being ignored. Some people spend their entire lives living inside their thoughts while remaining disconnected from the body carrying those thoughts. They know every fear inside their mind, every future possibility, every emotional worry, every imagined outcome, yet they barely notice the body beneath all of it. They ignore hunger until exhaustion appears, ignore tension until pain develops, ignore sadness until numbness spreads, Ignore fatigue until burnout arrives. The body keeps whispering for attention long before it begins screaming through exhaustion. Buddhist wisdom teaches that awareness begins with returning to direct experience, not only thoughts, not only emotions, the body too. Because the body carries truths, the mind often tries to escape. The body knows when something is too much. The body knows when rest is needed. The body knows when grief remains unresolved. The body knows when anxiety has become chronic. The body knows when emotional overwhelm has gone too far. But modern life trains people to override these signals constantly. Push through, stay productive, ignore the discomfort, keep going, rest later, numb yourself, distract yourself. And slowly, the connection between awareness and the body weakens. This disconnection creates profound emotional exhaustion because the nervous system can only carry ignored stress for so long before depletion appears. Many emotionally exhausted people are not only mentally overwhelmed, they are physically disconnected from themselves. They move through life almost entirely from the neck upward, trapped inside thought, while the body quietly absorbs all the emotional consequences underneath. This is why someone can say, "I'm fine," while their body tells another story completely. The jaw remains clenched, the shoulders stay tight, breathing remains shallow, sleep feels restless, the stomach feels heavy, the chest feels constricted. The body speaks constantly, but the mind has become too noisy to hear it. Buddhism places so much emphasis on mindfulness of the body because the body anchors awareness in reality. The mind escapes into fear, memory, comparison, fantasy, and worry. The body always remains here. But many people abandoned the present moment physically a long time ago. They eat without tasting, walk without feeling their steps, breathe without noticing the breath, rest without truly relaxing, touch their own body only through judgment. The nervous system becomes fragmented because awareness no longer inhabits the body fully. This fragmentation creates emotional fatigue. There is something deeply exhausting about living disconnected from your own physical experience. The body becomes treated like a machine instead of a living part of your emotional world. A person feels tired but ignores it, feels overwhelmed but keeps pushing, feels emotionally heavy but keeps distracting themselves, feels anxious but keeps scrolling, feels lonely but keeps staying busy. And over time, the body stops trusting the mind to care for it gently. This is why emotional exhaustion often appears physically before people consciously recognize what is happening emotionally. The body sends signals first: difficulty sleeping, chronic fatigue, tension headaches, digestive discomfort, brain fog, muscle tightness, restlessness, emotional numbness. The nervous system keeps asking for care long before collapse arrives. But many people were never taught how to listen. Some learned that their body only mattered when it performed well. Others learned to disconnect from bodily feelings because emotions felt unsafe. Some became so consumed by survival, productivity, or emotional stress that awareness gradually left the body almost completely. This creates a painful kind of inner abandonment. The body continues carrying life faithfully while receiving very little presence in return. Buddhist awareness gently rebuilds this lost relationship, not through perfection, through noticing the breath again, noticing tension again, noticing exhaustion honestly, noticing hunger, noticing sadness living inside the chest, noticing how quickly the nervous system becomes overwhelmed. These simple observations seem small, but they restore connection between awareness and the body. And connection changes healing completely. Many people try to solve emotional exhaustion entirely through mental analysis. They think more understanding alone will fix everything. But emotional exhaustion is not only intellectual, it is deeply physical. the nervous system itself becomes overwhelmed. This is why people sometimes feel emotionally drained even when they understand their problems logically. Awareness inside the mind is important, but the body also needs safety, rest, softness, nourishment, movement, breathing, and care. The body cannot heal through insight alone while remaining chronically neglected physically. Buddhist teachings understand this deeply. The breath becomes central because breathing reconnects awareness to the body gently. Every conscious breath tells the nervous system, "You are here. You can soften. You do not need to fight every moment." But many people have forgotten how to breathe fully. Anxious minds create anxious bodies. Breathing becomes shallow because the nervous system stays prepared for emotional threat constantly. The chest tightens. The stomach contracts, muscles remain tense, and because this tension becomes habitual, people stop noticing it entirely. They believe exhaustion is simply normal, but the body was never designed to carry endless emotional tension without relief. One of the deepest forms of self-neglect is ignoring what the body has been trying to communicate for years. The body says, "I am tired. I need stillness. I need nourishment. I need sleep. I need gentleness. I need release. I need care." But the mind keeps saying, "Not now. Keep functioning. Push through. You are lazy. You should be stronger." This inner conflict drains enormous emotional energy. The nervous system becomes trapped between genuine bodily need and mental resistance. Many emotionally exhausted people have not truly rested in years because even their rest contains self-judgment. They lie down physically while mentally attacking themselves for not doing more. The body never receives full permission to relax safely. This creates chronic tension underneath ordinary life. Buddhist compassion changes this relationship profoundly. Compassion toward the body softens the harshness many people carry internally. Instead of treating the body like an obstacle or machine, awareness begins treating it like something alive, deserving care. This may sound simple, but for emotionally exhausted people, it can feel revolutionary. To rest without guilt, to eat slowly, to breathe consciously, to notice exhaustion without shame, to stop forcing productivity during emotional overwhelm. These moments restore nervous system safety gradually. The body also stores emotional memory. This is why certain emotions appear physically. Anxiety tightens the chest. Fear contracts the stomach. Grief creates heaviness. Shame collapses posture. Anger creates heat and tension. The body remembers emotional experiences long after the mind tries to move on intellectually. Many people believe they have gotten over painful experiences because they stopped thinking about them consciously. But the body still reacts, still tightens, still braces emotionally during similar situations. The nervous system never fully processed what happened. This is why healing often requires returning awareness to bodily experience gently. Not to force emotional pain out aggressively, but to finally listen compassionately instead of disconnecting automatically. A person notices, "My chest tightens every time I feel rejected. My body becomes exhausted around certain people. My stomach hurts when I suppress my emotions. My breathing disappears when anxiety rises." This awareness matters deeply because the body reveals emotional truths the mind often hides. Buddhist mindfulness invites people back into the body not to obsess over discomfort, but to stop abandoning themselves physically. Because emotional exhaustion grows when awareness leaves the body completely. Modern life makes this disconnection extremely common. People live through screens, thoughts, notifications, and stimulation while barely noticing their own physical existence. Hours pass without real breathing, without stretching, without noticing fatigue, without true stillness. The body becomes an afterthought, and eventually exhaustion becomes unavoidable because the nervous system was never meant to function without conscious care indefinitely. This is especially true for sensitive people. Sensitive nervous systems absorb emotional environments deeply: tension from others, emotional conflict, noise, pressure, uncertainty, overstimulation. Without grounding in the body, sensitive people become emotionally flooded very quickly. The body needs rituals of return, simple moments, bare feet on the floor, deep breathing, slow walking, silence, stretching, resting consciously, feeling sunlight, drinking water slowly, eating with presence. These are not meaningless self-help habits. They reconnect awareness to the nervous system itself, and the nervous system heals through presence more than pressure. Many emotionally exhausted people secretly believe they must earn care. They only allow themselves gentleness after reaching impossible standards. But the body cannot survive endless emotional deprivation forever. The nervous system needs compassion now, not only after perfection is achieved. Buddhism teaches that awareness itself is healing because awareness interrupts unconscious neglect. Once you truly notice how disconnected you have become from your body, something softens. You begin checking in with yourself differently. Not, "How much did I accomplish today?" but, "How does my body actually feel right now?" Not, "How do I force myself harder?" but, "What is my nervous system trying to tell me?" These questions rebuild inner trust slowly. And trust matters because many emotionally exhausted people no longer feel safe inside themselves. Their body has been ignored, overridden, criticized, or abandoned for so long that exhaustion became its final way of demanding attention. The body eventually says, "You cannot continue treating me like this forever." And perhaps emotional exhaustion is not always punishment. Perhaps sometimes it is communication, a signal that awareness has drifted too far away from the body carrying your life, a signal that your nervous system no longer wants survival alone. It wants presence, care, gentleness, connection. This changes healing completely. Healing stops becoming another achievement to force. It becomes a relationship of listening. Listening to fatigue, listening to tension, listening to sadness, listening to overwhelm, listening to the breath again, and slowly the body responds. Sleep deepens slightly, breathing softens slightly, the chest loosens slightly, moments of calm return unexpectedly. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, but because awareness finally comes home to the body instead of abandoning it constantly. And maybe this is one of the quietest forms of Buddhist wisdom. Peace does not only live inside the mind. Sometimes peace begins the moment you stop ignoring the body that has been carrying your pain silently all along. The body begins healing the moment awareness returns to it gently. But even after someone starts listening to their exhaustion, another hidden pain often remains underneath everything else. The pain of pretending to be okay, pretending to be calm, pretending to be strong, pretending nothing hurts while carrying invisible emotional weight inside every day. And after a while, the soul becomes tired from carrying two lives at once. The life people see, and the life quietly breaking underneath it. Some people become so skilled at hiding their pain that even they forget how exhausted they truly are. They smile automatically. They answer, "I'm fine," without thinking. They continue working, helping others, replying to messages, showing up, laughing at the right moments, doing what is expected, and externally everything appears normal. But internally something feels deeply disconnected, because there is a quiet violence in forcing yourself to appear emotionally okay while your inner world is struggling to breathe. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows stronger when awareness becomes divided. One part of the self experiences pain honestly. Another part suppresses, edits, hides, or performs over that pain in order to survive socially or emotionally. This split drains enormous energy from the nervous system. The body must constantly manage two realities at once: the external image and the internal truth. That emotional division becomes exhausting. Many people learned very early that showing pain felt unsafe. Maybe vulnerability was ignored. Maybe sadness made others uncomfortable. Maybe asking for help led to rejection. Maybe emotional honesty was treated like weakness. So the nervous system adapted by creating a protective emotional mask. The mask says, "I'm okay. I can handle it. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about me." Even when the heart quietly feels overwhelmed underneath. At first, this emotional masking may help someone survive difficult environments, but over time, constantly performing emotional stability while suppressing real pain creates deep inner fatigue. Because pretending requires energy, a person must constantly monitor facial expressions, tone, behavior, emotional reactions, and vulnerability levels. They must hide exhaustion while still functioning. Hide sadness while staying socially acceptable. Hide fear while appearing confident. The nervous system never fully relaxes because authenticity feels emotionally dangerous. This is one reason emotionally exhausted people often feel tired after social interaction, even when nothing dramatic happened. They are not only talking to others, they are managing an emotional performance continuously underneath the conversation. The body absorbs the cost of that performance. There is something deeply lonely about suffering quietly while everyone around you believes you are fine. The person may receive praise for being strong, calm, or resilient, while internally they feel emotionally unseen. And the painful part is that sometimes they no longer know how to stop pretending. The mask becomes automatic. Someone asks how they are doing. The body says, "I'm drowning." The mouth says, "I'm okay." This disconnect slowly weakens the spirit because the inner self no longer feels acknowledged even by its own awareness. Buddhist teachings emphasize truthfulness not only in speech with others, but internally with yourself. Healing becomes difficult when the mind continuously denies emotional reality. Not because emotions need to be displayed dramatically all the time, but because the nervous system suffers when authentic pain remains trapped behind permanent emotional performance. Many emotionally exhausted people are carrying hidden grief nobody can see. Grief over relationships, grief over loneliness, grief over who they used to be, grief over lost time, grief over dreams that quietly disappeared, grief over emotional needs that were never met. But instead of allowing this grief to breathe honestly, they continue functioning mechanically. And eventually, functioning without emotional honesty becomes its own kind of suffering. This often creates numbness. The person no longer feels deeply connected to themselves because so much energy goes into emotional suppression. They continue surviving externally, but internally they feel distant, detached, empty, or strangely absent from their own life. The nervous system becomes emotionally exhausted from carrying pain without expression. Buddhist wisdom teaches that awareness heals through gentle presence. But emotional masks block awareness because the person becomes disconnected from their own authentic experience. A person may know how to comfort others beautifully while secretly feeling unable to comfort themselves. May know how to appear composed while quietly falling apart internally. May know how to keep functioning while feeling emotionally invisible. This inner contradiction drains emotional life force continuously. One of the most exhausting forms of pretending is pretending you are not affected by things that deeply hurt you. Someone says something painful and you laugh it off. Someone disappoints you and you minimize it immediately. Someone abandons you emotionally and you tell yourself it doesn't matter. But the body still feels everything. The nervous system absorbs hurt even when the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge it openly. This is why suppressed emotional pain often turns into physical exhaustion. The body carries emotional truth that awareness keeps denying. A person says, "I'm fine," but the body says, "I am carrying too much." Buddhism gently reminds us that suffering deepens when awareness abandons reality. Emotional pain itself is difficult enough, but denying that pain creates a second layer of suffering on top of the original wound. Now, the person is not only hurting, they are hurting alone internally. This emotional isolation becomes incredibly tiring. Many people secretly fear that if they stop pretending, everything inside them will collapse completely. They fear becoming too emotional, too needy, too weak, or too much. So they continue carrying impossible emotional weight silently. But emotional suppression does not create true strength. It creates emotional distance from the self. True strength is not the absence of pain. It is the ability to stay compassionately present with pain without abandoning yourself. That is very different. The nervous system relaxes when it no longer has to constantly perform emotional invulnerability. This is why moments of emotional honesty often feel strangely relieving, even when tears appear. The relief comes from no longer carrying the exhausting burden of pretending for a moment, finally saying, "I'm not okay. This hurts. I'm tired. I feel overwhelmed. I don't know how much longer I can keep carrying this." These moments are not weakness. They are emotional truth returning. And truth restores energy because it ends the internal split between appearance and reality. Many emotionally exhausted people are living with chronic emotional self-abandonment. They consistently ignore their own emotional reality in order to maintain external stability. The body eventually becomes depleted from this disconnect. You can see this in people who smile constantly while carrying deep sadness. The smile itself becomes heavy after a while, not because smiling is bad, but because the nervous system knows the smile no longer reflects the inner truth. The body longs for congruence, for alignment between inner reality and outer expression. Without that alignment, emotional exhaustion grows. Buddhist mindfulness gently reunites these divided parts of the self. Awareness begins noticing, "I am pretending again. I am minimizing my pain again. I am performing calmness while feeling overwhelmed inside." This noticing matters deeply because unconscious emotional performance loses power once clearly seen. The goal is not dramatic emotional exposure with everyone. Buddhism values wisdom and discernment too. The goal is inner honesty, honesty with yourself first, the kind that allows you to admit, "I am carrying pain. I need rest. I feel lonely. I feel hurt. I feel emotionally tired," without immediately judging yourself for it. This changes the nervous system profoundly because emotional truth creates inner coherence. The body no longer has to fight against awareness constantly. One of the saddest forms of emotional exhaustion happens when people become emotionally available to everyone except themselves. They listen to others compassionately, support others endlessly, comfort everyone around them, but when their own pain appears, they dismiss it immediately. The nervous system quietly learns, "Everyone else deserves compassion more than I do." This belief creates deep emotional depletion. Buddhist compassion includes the self too. Without self-compassion, emotional caregiving becomes unsustainable because the person keeps pouring energy outward while remaining emotionally disconnected inwardly. Eventually, exhaustion becomes unavoidable. Another painful form of pretending is pretending you no longer care when you actually care deeply. Some people do this after repeated disappointment. They become emotionally guarded to protect themselves from further pain. They act detached, unbothered, independent, unaffected. But underneath the armor, longing still exists, love still exists, fear still exists. The emotional guarding itself becomes exhausting because the nervous system stays defended constantly. Real peace is not emotional numbness. It is emotional openness without constant fear-based self-protection. But many people have spent so long surviving emotionally that they no longer remember what openness feels like. Buddhist teachings speak often about illusion. Emotional masks are one of the deepest illusions people carry, not because they are fake people, but because fear taught them to hide their true emotional state in order to survive. And over time, the mask becomes so familiar that they forget who they are underneath it. This creates quiet grief inside the soul, the grief of feeling emotionally unseen, emotionally disconnected, emotionally hidden, even in close relationships, because true connection becomes difficult when nobody is meeting the real version of you. Many emotionally exhausted people secretly crave one thing more than anything else: the ability to stop pretending, to stop carrying emotional performances constantly, to stop acting stronger than they feel, to stop smiling through pain automatically, to stop functioning mechanically while internally collapsing. The body longs for rest from emotional acting. This is why safe emotional spaces feel so healing, not because problems magically disappear there, but because the nervous system finally receives permission to exist honestly without constant performance. No mask, no role, no pretending, just truth. Buddhist awareness slowly creates this inner safety. Awareness says, you do not need to abandon your pain to deserve love. You do not need to perform perfection to deserve rest. You do not need to hide exhaustion to remain worthy. These truths soften the nervous system deeply, because many emotionally exhausted people are not only tired from life itself, they are tired from carrying emotional masks every day, tired from acting okay, tired from appearing strong, tired from pretending they are unaffected, tired from surviving quietly. Eventually, the soul begins longing for honesty more than performance. And maybe healing begins there, not with dramatic transformation overnight, not with becoming emotionally perfect, but with small moments of truth. Moments where you stop lying to yourself about how much pain you are carrying. Moments where you stop forcing smiles your nervous system can no longer hold. Moments where awareness gently says, this hurts, this matters, you are not okay right now. Without shame, because emotional honesty is not weakness. It is the beginning of inner reunion. The nervous system heals when it no longer has to split itself into two separate realities constantly. And perhaps this is why pretending becomes so exhausting after a while. The body can survive pain for long periods, but carrying pain while simultaneously pretending it does not exist slowly drains the spirit in ways words rarely capture. Eventually, the mask itself becomes heavier than the pain underneath it, and the heart begins whispering something very simple. I do not want to pretend anymore. The heart begins healing when it no longer has to pretend all the time. But once the mask starts falling away, another fear often rises underneath it. The fear of not knowing what will happen next, not knowing how life will unfold, not knowing whether things will work out, whether people will stay, whether pain will return, whether the future will feel safe. And for many people, this fear quietly follows them everywhere, even on the calmest days. Because the mind keeps searching for certainty in a world that was never designed to give permanent answers. There is a strange kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly needing reassurance about the future. A person may wake up to a quiet morning with nothing urgent happening at all, yet internally, the nervous system already feels heavy. Thoughts begin moving immediately. Questions appear before the day even starts. What if something goes wrong? What if I fail? What if they stop caring? What if life never gets better? What if I make the wrong decision? What if I cannot handle what is coming? The body remains safe in the present moment, but the mind keeps traveling ahead, searching for guarantees it can never fully find. This is one of the deepest causes of emotional exhaustion, the constant craving for certainty. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows when the mind demands stability from a life built on impermanence. Everything changes, relationships change, emotions change, plans change, bodies change, circumstances change. Even the version of yourself you believe you are changes quietly over time. But the human mind longs for permanence. It wants clear answers, clear outcomes, clear futures, clear emotional safety. And when certainty cannot be found, the nervous system becomes restless. Many people spend enormous emotional energy trying to predict life so they can feel emotionally prepared before anything happens. They overthink possibilities, rehearse conversations, analyze signs, search for reassurance repeatedly. They believe certainty will finally allow them to relax. But certainty rarely arrives in the permanent way the mind wants, so the searching continues endlessly. This creates chronic emotional tension because the nervous system never fully settles into the present moment. It keeps waiting for some future point where everything finally feels resolved. The mind says, "Once I know what is happening, I will feel okay. Once I know they love me, I can relax. Once I know my future is secure, I can breathe deeply. Once I know nothing bad will happen, I can finally rest." But life keeps moving. New unknowns appear, new uncertainties emerge, and the nervous system remains trapped in emotional anticipation. This is why even quiet days can feel heavy. The exhaustion is not always coming from external events. Sometimes it comes from the invisible emotional labor of trying to mentally secure the future all day long. The body sits in a peaceful room while the mind searches for danger anyway. Buddhist teachings often return to the present moment because the present moment is the only place life is actually happening. But the certainty-seeking mind cannot stay present for very long. It constantly moves ahead, trying to emotionally solve tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. This movement becomes exhausting. You can see it in ordinary moments. Someone checks their phone repeatedly looking for reassurance. Someone rereads messages trying to detect emotional certainty. Someone cannot enjoy a peaceful evening because they are worrying about next month. Someone cannot rest because they need answers immediately before allowing themselves peace. The nervous system becomes addicted to resolution. But reality itself remains unresolved much of the time. This is one of the hardest truths for the anxious mind to accept. Life will always contain uncertainty. No relationship comes with permanent guarantees. No future arrives fully secured. No amount of overthinking removes all risk from being alive. And yet the mind continues searching, searching for signs, searching for proof, searching for certainty. This endless searching quietly drains emotional energy every single day. Many emotionally exhausted people are not only tired from problems themselves, they are tired from trying to eliminate uncertainty emotionally before life unfolds naturally. The nervous system never stops preparing for rejection, preparing for disappointment, preparing for failure, preparing for abandonment, preparing for loss. And because most feared outcomes never fully arrive the way the mind imagines, enormous emotional energy gets wasted on imagined futures repeatedly. Buddhist wisdom teaches that attachment creates suffering, and one of the deepest attachments people carry is attachment to certainty itself. The mind becomes emotionally dependent on knowing where relationships stand, knowing how life will unfold, knowing that pain will not return, knowing that everything will work out safely. But certainty is fragile because life itself remains fluid. This creates a painful conflict inside the nervous system. The mind demands guarantees from a reality that keeps changing continuously. And eventually, the tension of trying to hold on to certainty becomes heavier than uncertainty itself. Many people secretly believe uncertainty is dangerous because uncertainty feels emotionally vulnerable. When outcomes remain unclear, the nervous system loses its illusion of control, so the mind compensates by thinking more analysis, more checking, more predicting, more worrying, more emotional preparation. But overthinking uncertainty does not create peace. Often, it only prolongs emotional suffering. This is why anxious minds rarely feel rested. Even during silence, the mind continues searching for answers. The body lies down, but the nervous system remains emotionally awake. The uncertainty itself may be small, but the emotional resistance to uncertainty becomes enormous. Buddhist awareness changes this relationship slowly. Instead of constantly demanding certainty before allowing peace, awareness begins learning how to exist gently inside uncertainty itself. This is very different from giving up. It means recognizing, I do not know exactly what will happen, and I do not need to destroy myself trying to know. That realization softens the nervous system profoundly, because the craving for certainty often becomes endless. A person receives reassurance briefly, but the calm disappears quickly. Another question appears immediately after, another doubt, another fear, another imagined possibility. The mind keeps moving the finish line of safety. This happens often in relationships. Someone receives love and affection, but instead of feeling secure deeply, the mind immediately asks, but what if they change? But what if this does not last? But what if I lose this? The nervous system struggles to receive love peacefully because uncertainty about the future interrupts the present moment constantly. The same happens with success, healing, and emotional growth. A person finally experiences peace briefly, then immediately fears losing it. Finally feels hopeful, then fears disappointment. Finally rests, then worries the calm will disappear. The mind keeps trying to emotionally secure permanence from experiences that naturally change, and this creates quiet exhaustion underneath daily life. Buddhist teachings on impermanence are not meant to create hopelessness. They are meant to free the nervous system from exhausting attachment to certainty. Because when you stop demanding permanent guarantees from life, something surprising happens. You begin experiencing moments more fully instead of constantly fearing their ending. You begin breathing more deeply instead of preparing for disaster all the time. You begin listening instead of mentally predicting. You begin resting instead of emotionally rehearsing. The nervous system softens because it no longer treats uncertainty like an emergency every second of the day. This softening matters deeply because many emotionally exhausted people are carrying invisible fear constantly. Fear of what might happen, fear of what could change, fear of what they cannot control. And the body absorbs all of it physically. Tight chest, restless sleep, shallow breathing, heavy fatigue, mental spinning, difficulty relaxing. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed from living too far ahead emotionally. One of the most painful things about craving certainty is that it often destroys the peace already available in the present moment. A beautiful evening becomes interrupted by future worry. A loving conversation becomes interrupted by fear of loss. A quiet morning becomes interrupted by overthinking. A moment of rest becomes interrupted by imagined problems. The mind abandons reality, searching for guarantees that do not exist yet. And in doing so, it loses the life already happening now. Buddhist mindfulness gently calls awareness back to this breath, this room, this moment, this cup of tea, this sunset, this conversation, this simple present experience. Not because the future does not matter, but because emotional life cannot survive when awareness permanently leaves the present, searching for certainty elsewhere. Many people secretly believe uncertainty means something is wrong, but uncertainty is simply part of being alive. No one fully knows what tomorrow holds. No one fully controls outcomes. No one fully escapes change. And strangely, accepting this truth can create more peace than fighting it endlessly, because resistance to uncertainty creates chronic emotional contraction. The body tightens around unanswered questions. The mind spins around unknown outcomes. The nervous system waits constantly for emotional closure. But life rarely offers complete closure. There will always be something unknown ahead. This realization feels frightening to the control-driven mind, but deeply freeing to the exhausted heart, because once you stop demanding impossible levels of certainty from life, emotional energy begins returning naturally. The nervous system no longer spends every moment scanning for guarantees. The mind no longer needs to solve the entire future before resting. The heart no longer grips every outcome so tightly. This does not mean fear disappears completely. Human beings will always feel uncertainty sometimes, but awareness changes the relationship to it. Instead of drowning in uncertainty, you begin learning how to breathe inside it. That is real emotional resilience. Not becoming emotionless, not eliminating fear forever, but learning how to remain present even when answers are incomplete. This is one reason Buddhist meditation focuses so deeply on the breath. The breath exists here, not in tomorrow's imagined problems, not in next year's fears, not in uncertain futures. Here. The breath reminds the nervous system, you are alive in this moment. You do not need to solve everything right now. You are allowed to exist without complete certainty. These reminders seem simple, but emotionally exhausted people often need them desperately. Because many have spent years carrying the impossible burden of trying to mentally secure the future before allowing themselves peace. And the burden became too heavy. Eventually, exhaustion becomes the body's way of saying, you cannot keep carrying tomorrow every moment of today. And perhaps healing begins when awareness finally stops demanding perfect certainty before allowing rest. Not because uncertainty suddenly becomes comfortable, but because the heart realizes something profound. Peace was never hidden inside guaranteed outcomes. Peace begins the moment you stop sacrificing the present, trying to control what has not even happened yet. The heart begins softening when it stops demanding certainty from every part of life. But even after the fear of the future quiets down, another silent habit continues stealing peace in ways many people barely notice. The habit of measuring yourself against other people, their success, their appearance, their relationships, their confidence, their healing, their happiness. And slowly, without realizing it, your own life starts feeling smaller every time someone else's life looks brighter. Some people wake up already feeling behind before the day even begins. Not because anything terrible happened, but because the mind immediately starts comparing progress, comparing appearance, comparing energy, comparing relationships, comparing careers, comparing emotional strength. The nervous system quietly scans other people's lives and asks one painful question again and again. Why am I not there yet? This question creates enormous emotional exhaustion because comparison turns life into a constant emotional measurement instead of a direct human experience. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows when the mind becomes trapped in craving and dissatisfaction. Comparison feeds both at the same time. The mind looks outward constantly, searching for evidence that someone else is happier, more successful, more loved, more healed, more attractive, more fulfilled. And once the comparison begins, Peace quietly disappears. The painful part is that most comparison happens unconsciously. People rarely sit down intentionally and decide to feel inadequate. The mind simply learned to measure worth through external observation over time. A person scrolls through social media and suddenly feels like their own life is failing. Someone hears about another person's success and immediately questions their own progress. Someone sees a happy couple and suddenly feels lonely. Someone notices another person's confidence and suddenly feels emotionally smaller. The comparison happens in seconds, but the emotional weight stays much longer. This is one of the hidden reasons people feel emotionally exhausted even during ordinary days. The mind keeps silently turning life into competition. And competition exhausts the nervous system because it constantly creates the feeling that who you are right now is not enough. Buddhist teachings remind us that craving often begins the moment the mind rejects the present experience in favor of another imagined reality. Comparison intensifies this rejection deeply. The mind says, "My life should look more like theirs. I should be further ahead. I should be happier by now. I should be more successful. I should be more healed." And little by little, the person stops inhabiting their own life fully because they are emotionally chasing someone else's version of fulfillment instead. This creates quiet suffering that many people do not even recognize anymore because comparison has become so normalized in modern life. Social media intensifies this constantly. Human beings were never meant to emotionally process thousands of carefully edited lives every day. The nervous system absorbs endless images of beauty, success, productivity, wealth, relationships, happiness, and achievement. And because the mind naturally compares for survival and belonging, emotional exhaustion begins building underneath constant exposure. A person may spend only a few minutes online and still walk away feeling emotionally heavier afterward, not because their own life suddenly became worse, but because comparison distorted their perception of it. This distortion is deeply exhausting because it disconnects people from gratitude, presence, and self-acceptance. The mind becomes obsessed with what is missing instead of connected to what already exists. Comparison also creates emotional impatience. A person no longer allows their life to unfold naturally because they feel pressure to catch up constantly. Healing must happen faster. Success must happen sooner. Relationships must appear more perfect. Growth must look more impressive. The nervous system loses the ability to move at its own human pace, and this creates chronic internal pressure. Buddhist wisdom teaches that every life unfolds through different causes, conditions, wounds, timing, lessons, and experiences. But the comparing mind ignores this completely. It reduces human existence into emotional ranking. Who is ahead? Who is behind? Who is winning? Who is failing? This creates enormous emotional suffering because life stops feeling like a journey and starts feeling like a test you are constantly failing. Many emotionally exhausted people secretly feel like they are running out of time, not because time itself is attacking them, but because comparison keeps showing them imagined versions of where they should already be. Someone else bought a house. Someone else got married. Someone else became successful. Someone else healed faster. Someone else seems happier. The nervous system absorbs all of this as silent personal inadequacy. And after enough comparison, even small moments of peace become difficult to enjoy because the mind interrupts constantly with emotional measurement. A person cannot celebrate their progress because someone else seems further ahead, cannot enjoy their body because another body appears more desirable, cannot enjoy rest because someone else appears more productive, cannot enjoy their relationship because another relationship looks happier. The present moment becomes emotionally contaminated by comparison. Buddhist mindfulness interrupts this by returning awareness to direct experience instead of imagined emotional rankings. But without awareness, comparison becomes automatic. The mind continuously asks, how do I measure up? Am I enough? Am I falling behind? These questions quietly drain emotional energy every single day. One of the deepest forms of comparison is invisible comparison, not only comparing possessions or achievements, but comparing emotional states. Someone else seems calmer, someone else seems mentally stronger, someone else seems more confident, someone else seems emotionally stable, and suddenly the person begins feeling ashamed of their own human struggles. This creates loneliness because comparison isolates people emotionally from their authentic experience. Instead of relating compassionately to themselves, they judge themselves against imagined standards constantly. The nervous system becomes emotionally unsafe. There is also deep exhaustion in comparing your hidden pain to someone else's visible success. Most people compare their internal struggles to other people's external appearance. They see someone smiling and assume that person feels whole internally. They see confidence and assume there is no fear underneath. They see success and assume there is no suffering behind it. But human beings carry invisible pain everywhere. The comparing mind forgets this. It creates illusions. Illusions that everyone else is more complete, more secure, more certain, more fulfilled. And the more these illusions grow, the more disconnected people become from compassion toward themselves. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that attachment to identity creates suffering. Comparison strengthens attachment to identity constantly because the mind becomes obsessed with how the self appears relative to others. Am I attractive enough? Successful enough? Interesting enough? Loved enough? Accomplished enough? The nervous system remains trapped in self-evaluation instead of peaceful awareness. This creates profound emotional fatigue because the mind never fully rests from measurement. Even achievements become emotionally unsatisfying after a while because comparison immediately moves the standard again. A person finally reaches one goal, then suddenly notices someone doing better. Finally heals one wound, then notices another person healing faster. Finally feels peace briefly, then comparison steals it again. The finish line keeps moving endlessly. This is why comparison often destroys joy quietly. Not because joy disappears naturally, but because the comparing mind interrupts contentment before it can fully settle into the heart. Buddhist teachings speak deeply about enoughness, though not always directly in those words. The present moment already contains life itself, but comparison blinds awareness to this reality constantly. The comparing mind cannot receive life fully because it keeps emotionally looking sideways. Someone else's beauty becomes proof of your ugliness. Someone else's success becomes proof of your failure. Someone else's confidence becomes proof of your inadequacy. But these conclusions are illusions created by fearful thinking. Every human being walks through different emotional terrain, different wounds, different timing, different lessons, different nervous systems, different forms of suffering nobody else fully sees. Comparison ignores all of this complexity completely, and because it ignores reality, it creates suffering. Many emotionally exhausted people secretly believe they are failing at life because they constantly compare their unfinished journey to someone else's carefully displayed moments. This creates quiet hopelessness. The nervous system begins feeling, I will never be enough. I will never catch up. I will never become who I should be. These thoughts become emotionally heavy over time. Buddhist compassion softens comparison by returning awareness to humanity itself instead of emotional ranking. Everyone suffers. Everyone feels uncertain sometimes. Everyone carries wounds invisibly. Everyone struggles with fear, loneliness, longing, and imperfection in different forms. This realization reconnects people to humility and compassion instead of competition, because comparison often strips away shared humanity and replaces it with emotional separation. The comparing mind says, "They are above me, I am below them," but awareness gently says, "We are both human beings carrying different forms of pain." That shift changes emotional exhaustion profoundly. The nervous system relaxes when it no longer treats life like endless competition. This does not mean losing inspiration or ambition. Buddhist wisdom is not against growth. It simply warns against tying your worth to comparison constantly. Growth rooted in self-hatred becomes exhausting. Growth rooted in awareness becomes sustainable. There is a huge difference. One says, "I must become more because I am not enough." The other says, "I can grow while still honoring my humanity now." This softer relationship with growth protects emotional energy deeply. Many emotionally exhausted people are not weak. They are simply carrying years of unconscious comparison, years of measuring, years of doubting, years of feeling behind, years of silently questioning their worth through other people's lives. The nervous system becomes tired from constantly evaluating itself. And perhaps the saddest part is that comparison steals presence before people even realize it happened. A beautiful moment arrives, then comparison interrupts it. A peaceful day unfolds, then comparison darkens it. A small success appears, then comparison minimizes it. Life keeps happening, but the mind keeps emotionally abandoning it. Buddhist mindfulness gently calls awareness back to your breath, your path, your healing, your body, your life, your pace. Not because your journey is perfect, but because it is yours. And healing begins when awareness finally stops treating your humanity like a competition you must constantly win. This shift happens slowly. You begin noticing comparison sooner. You notice how quickly peace disappears when measurement begins. You notice how heavy your nervous system feels after constant self-evaluation. And gradually, awareness interrupts the habit. You stop needing to emotionally rank your life every moment. You stop turning other people's success into proof of your inadequacy. You stop demanding identical timing from yourself. The nervous system softens because it no longer carries endless emotional competition internally. And maybe this is one of the quietest forms of freedom Buddhism offers. The freedom to exist without constantly measuring your worth against the changing appearances of others. Because peace was never hiding inside, becoming better than everyone else. Peace begins the moment you stop abandoning your own life while staring endlessly at someone else's. The nervous system begins healing when it stops turning life into endless comparison. But even after comparison softens, many people still discover something painful. Their mind no longer knows how to be quiet. The moment silence appears, something rushes in immediately. Scrolling, noise, music, notifications, videos, thoughts, more information, more stimulation, more distraction. And eventually the mind becomes so crowded that even rest starts feeling noisy. Some people have not experienced true inner silence in years. From the moment they wake up until the moment they fall asleep, their attention is constantly occupied by something: a screen, a voice, a notification, a conversation, a thought, a memory, a video playing in the background, music filling empty space, endless scrolling before sleep, endless stimulation throughout the day. The nervous system never fully stops receiving input, and because of this, the mind slowly loses its ability to rest deeply. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering grows when awareness becomes trapped in constant mental movement. The mind naturally produces thoughts, emotions, and reactions, but modern life adds another layer on top of this: Endless external stimulation. The result is a nervous system that never fully settles. Many emotionally exhausted people are not only carrying emotional pain, they are carrying mental overcrowding. Their inner world has become so full of noise that they no longer remember what stillness feels like. This exhaustion is difficult to notice at first because stimulation feels normal now. Most people move through the day surrounded by sound, screens, information, and interruption constantly. Silence feels strange. Empty space feels uncomfortable. Stillness feels almost threatening, so the mind keeps reaching for more input automatically. Another video, another message, another scroll, another distraction, another piece of information, and little by little, the nervous system becomes overstimulated without realizing it. The body pays the price quietly. Buddhist teachings often emphasize silence because silence allows awareness to return to itself. But many people no longer know how to sit quietly without immediately escaping into stimulation. The moment stillness appears, the hand reaches for the phone. The moment discomfort appears, distraction arrives. The moment loneliness appears, noise fills the room. The nervous system becomes addicted to constant input because silence begins exposing emotions, fears, and exhaustion that were hidden underneath the stimulation all along. This creates a painful cycle. The more overwhelmed the mind becomes, the more stimulation it seeks to avoid discomfort. And the more stimulation it consumes, the less rested the nervous system feels. Eventually, even peaceful moments stop feeling peaceful because the mind no longer knows how to slow down. A person may sit in a quiet room while internally replaying videos, conversations, thoughts, worries, music, and mental commentary all at once. The external world becomes silent, but the internal world keeps racing. This is one of the deepest forms of modern exhaustion, a mind with no silence left inside it. The nervous system was never designed to process endless stimulation without pause. Human beings evolved with natural rhythms, quiet evenings, slower moments, space for emotional processing, space for boredom, space for reflection. Now the mind is flooded continuously. News, opinions, arguments, images, comparisons, entertainment, notifications, conversations, information without end. The nervous system becomes emotionally saturated. And when the mind becomes saturated, emotional exhaustion follows naturally. This is why some people feel tired after hours of scrolling, even though they did nothing physically demanding. The brain has been processing enormous amounts of emotional and visual information rapidly without rest. Every image affects the nervous system. Every comparison affects attention. Every emotional headline activates something internally. Every notification interrupts focus. The body remains still while the mind absorbs hundreds of emotional impressions silently. Eventually, awareness becomes fragmented. This fragmentation creates inner restlessness. A person tries to rest, but the mind keeps jumping rapidly between thoughts and stimulation patterns it has practiced all day long. One thought, another urge, another distraction, another emotional reaction. The mind becomes conditioned to constant movement. Buddhist wisdom describes this beautifully through the concept of attachment and craving. The overstimulated mind constantly craves more input because it fears emptiness. But the craving itself becomes suffering. The mind says, one more scroll, one more video, one more distraction, one more check. But satisfaction never truly arrives. The stimulation briefly numbs discomfort. Then restlessness returns almost immediately afterward. This is why overstimulation often creates emotional numbness instead of peace. The nervous system becomes overloaded, making it difficult to feel deeply connected to anything fully. Joy feels muted. Attention weakens. Presence disappears. Life starts feeling blurry. The mind becomes too crowded to experience moments clearly. Many emotionally exhausted people secretly fear silence because silence removes distraction from what they are carrying internally. Without stimulation, loneliness becomes noticeable, grief becomes noticeable, fear becomes noticeable, exhaustion becomes noticeable, so the mind keeps consuming input to avoid emotional contact with itself. But avoidance through stimulation creates deeper exhaustion over time because the nervous system never fully processes anything. Emotional experiences remain unfinished underneath constant distraction. Buddhist mindfulness gently interrupts this cycle by slowing awareness down again, not forcing the mind aggressively into silence, not condemning technology or stimulation completely, simply creating moments where awareness can breathe without interruption, moments without scrolling, without noise, without input, without constant emotional consumption. These moments restore nervous system balance because the brain finally stops processing endless information temporarily. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. Many people discover how restless their mind actually is the moment stimulation disappears. Thoughts become louder, anxiety surfaces, the urge to check something immediately appears. But this discomfort was already present before the silence arrived. The stimulation was simply covering it temporarily. This realization changes everything, because true rest cannot happen while the nervous system remains continuously overstimulated. A person may sleep for hours and still wake up mentally tired because the mind never truly slowed down before sleep, scrolling until exhaustion replaces natural rest, falling asleep to noise, waking up immediately into stimulation again. The nervous system never experiences real spaciousness. This creates chronic emotional fatigue. The brain becomes overloaded from constant switching between inputs. Attention fragments repeatedly. Emotional processing weakens. Inner stillness disappears. And without stillness, peace becomes difficult to feel. Buddhist teachings value simplicity, partly because simplicity protects awareness from unnecessary mental overcrowding. Modern life often moves in the opposite direction. More information, more urgency, more stimulation, more emotional consumption. The mind becomes addicted to intensity. Quiet moments begin feeling emotionally insufficient because the nervous system no longer knows how to settle into simplicity naturally. A peaceful evening feels boring. Silence feels empty. Stillness feels uncomfortable. So the mind keeps reaching outward constantly. This outward reaching creates deep exhaustion because awareness never fully returns home to itself. You can see this clearly in moments where people instinctively reach for stimulation the second discomfort appears. A few seconds of waiting, immediately checking the phone, a moment of sadness, immediately turning on noise, a quiet room, immediately searching for distraction. The nervous system becomes afraid of unoccupied awareness. But healing often begins precisely in those unoccupied moments. Not because silence magically solves everything, but because silence allows the nervous system to stop absorbing new stimulation long enough to hear itself again. The breath becomes noticeable. The body becomes noticeable. Emotions become noticeable. Exhaustion becomes noticeable, and awareness finally has space to respond compassionately instead of immediately escaping again. Many emotionally exhausted people are not lazy or weak. Their nervous system is simply overwhelmed from years of non-stop mental consumption. Too much noise, too much information, too much emotional input, too much comparison, too much stimulation without recovery. The mind becomes like a crowded room where nothing can fully settle. Buddhist meditation creates healing partly because it trains the nervous system to tolerate stillness again, to remain present without immediately reaching for stimulation, to observe thoughts without feeding them continuously. This does not happen instantly. At first, the overstimulated mind resists silence strongly. It becomes restless, impatient, distracted. The urge for input feels almost physical, but gradually something softens. The nervous system begins remembering what spaciousness feels like. A quiet walk starts feeling calming again. Sitting without distraction becomes possible again. Listening deeply becomes easier. Breathing slows naturally. The mind no longer needs constant interruption to survive itself. This is deeply restorative because emotional exhaustion often grows when awareness never receives time to integrate experience properly. Life keeps entering the mind without pause. Nothing fully settles, nothing fully processes. The nervous system becomes emotionally flooded, and eventually the body responds with fatigue because it cannot continue carrying endless mental activity indefinitely. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that peace is not created by consuming more endlessly. Peace often appears when unnecessary noise begins falling away. Not only external noise, internal noise too. The endless urge for stimulation, the fear of silence, the addiction to distraction. These habits quietly drain emotional energy every single day. Many people do not realize how exhausted they are until they finally experience genuine stillness for the first time in a long time. A moment without scrolling, without noise, without performance, without constant emotional input. And suddenly the nervous system exhales, not because life became perfect, but because awareness finally stopped running for a moment. This changes how exhaustion is understood completely. The problem is not only stress, not only sadness, not only overthinking. Sometimes the nervous system is simply overwhelmed from never being allowed silence, never being allowed emptiness, never being allowed rest from stimulation, and maybe healing begins very quietly. A few moments without the phone, a slower breath, a silent morning, a walk without distraction, a meal eaten with awareness, a room with no noise for a little while. These moments seem small, but they reconnect awareness to stillness again. And stillness heals the nervous system in ways overstimulation never can. Because beneath all the noise, the mind has been longing for one thing for a very long time. Space. Space to breathe. Space to feel. Space to exist without constant interruption. And perhaps this is why so many people feel emotionally exhausted without fully understanding why. Their mind became a room that never stopped filling with noise, and the soul was never given silence long enough to rest. The mind begins breathing again when silence finally returns. But even after the noise softens, many people still carry one last invisible pressure through every single day. The pressure to prove they are doing enough, achieving enough, producing enough, becoming enough. And when the day ends without meeting the impossible standards inside their mind, guilt quietly takes the place where peace was supposed to be. Because somewhere along the way, many people stopped believing they were worthy of rest unless they earned it first. There are people who feel guilty sitting still even when they are exhausted. Guilty resting, guilty sleeping, guilty slowing down, guilty doing nothing. Their body asks for softness, but the mind immediately responds with pressure. You should be doing more. You wasted today. You are falling behind. You are not productive enough. You should have accomplished more by now. And because this voice repeats itself constantly, even peaceful moments become emotionally heavy. Buddhist wisdom teaches that suffering often grows when identity becomes attached to performance. The mind begins measuring worth through productivity instead of presence. Life becomes less about being alive and more about proving value continuously. This creates enormous emotional exhaustion because the nervous system never truly receives permission to rest. Many people no longer know how to simply exist without turning existence into achievement. Every day becomes a test. Every quiet moment becomes evidence of failure. Every unfinished task becomes emotional pressure, and eventually the soul becomes tired of trying to earn its right to breathe. This pressure often begins very early in life. Some people learned they received praise mainly when they achieved something: good grades, hard work, helping others, staying productive, being useful, performing well emotionally. The nervous system slowly absorbed one dangerous belief: my worth depends on what I produce. This belief follows people into adulthood quietly. Even during exhaustion, the mind keeps asking, "What did you accomplish today? Did you do enough? Are you wasting your life? Should you be working harder?" The body may desperately need rest, but the mind interprets rest as failure. This creates inner conflict that becomes emotionally draining over time. The nervous system never fully relaxes because stillness feels unsafe. Slowing down triggers guilt. Rest triggers self-judgment. Silence triggers anxiety about unfinished goals or imagined inadequacy, so the person keeps pushing, even while tired, even while emotionally depleted, even while disconnected from themselves completely. Buddhist teachings gently challenge this entire way of living. They remind us that human beings are not machines designed only for endless output. Life is not only about productivity. Presence matters too. Stillness matters. Awareness matters. Compassion matters. Rest matters. But modern culture rarely teaches this deeply. Instead, people are taught to glorify exhaustion, to admire busyness, to equate worth with constant achievement. And because of this, many emotionally exhausted people secretly feel ashamed of their own humanity, ashamed of needing rest, ashamed of slowing down, ashamed of emotional fatigue, ashamed of not constantly performing. This shame creates another layer of suffering on top of exhaustion itself. A person may finally sit down to rest, but instead of peace, guilt arrives immediately. The mind says, "You should be working. You are wasting time. Other people are doing more. You are lazy." The nervous system becomes incapable of receiving rest fully because the mind keeps attacking the body during moments that should feel restorative. This is one reason emotional exhaustion becomes chronic. The body never experiences true recovery. Even during stillness, internal pressure continues running. Buddhist wisdom speaks often about enoughness, though many people overlook this part completely. The present moment itself can already be complete without constant proving. This does not mean abandoning responsibility or ambition. It means loosening the endless emotional attachment to productivity as the source of worth. There is a difference between meaningful effort and compulsive proving. Meaningful effort comes from presence and intention. Compulsive proving comes from fear of not being enough. One nourishes the nervous system, the other slowly destroys it. Many people do not realize how much emotional energy disappears into trying to prove value constantly, trying to prove intelligence, trying to prove success, trying to prove usefulness, trying to prove worthiness, trying to prove they deserve love, rest, or belonging. The nervous system remains trapped in endless performance mode. And performance mode is exhausting because the person never fully arrives inside themselves. They are always becoming, always chasing, always measuring their value against future achievement. The present moment becomes emotionally insufficient. Even small moments of rest feel undeserved because the mind keeps postponing peace. After you achieve more, after you finish everything, after you become better, after you finally succeed. But the finish line keeps moving. Buddhist teachings on craving explain this beautifully. The mind believes satisfaction lives in the next accomplishment, the next milestone, the next productive day. But once one goal is reached, another appears immediately. The nervous system never fully arrives at peace because peace remains conditional, and conditional peace creates chronic emotional fatigue. You can see this in people who accomplish enormous things but still feel restless internally. They finish one task and immediately search for another. Rest feels empty. Slowing down feels frightening, because underneath the productivity is often fear. Fear of being unworthy without achievement, fear of falling behind, fear of disappointing others, fear of confronting unresolved emotions in stillness. The activity itself becomes emotional escape. Buddhist awareness gently reveals this pattern without judgment. It asks a quiet but powerful question. Who are you when you are not producing? For many people, this question feels deeply uncomfortable because they have spent so long identifying with performance that simple existence feels emotionally unfamiliar. A quiet evening feels pointless without productivity. A slow day feels wasted. Rest feels undeserved. The nervous system becomes addicted to striving, and eventually even success loses emotional meaning because the body remains exhausted underneath it all. One of the saddest forms of emotional exhaustion happens when people can no longer enjoy their own life because they are constantly trying to optimize it. Every moment becomes measured, every day evaluated, every hour judged. The mind constantly asks, was today productive enough? Did I do enough? Am I becoming enough? This endless evaluation steals peace before the day even ends. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that life is happening now, not only after perfection is achieved. But the productivity-driven mind struggles to receive this truth because it fears stillness will expose inadequacy. So it keeps moving endlessly. More goals, more tasks, more proving, more pressure. The nervous system becomes overwhelmed not only by work itself, but by the emotional meaning attached to work. Work becomes identity. Productivity becomes worth. Achievement becomes emotional survival. This creates deep exhaustion because no human being can sustain constant internal pressure forever. The body eventually says, "This pace is hurting me." But many people ignore these signals because slowing down feels emotionally dangerous. Without productivity, they no longer know how to validate their existence internally. This is why some people feel anxious on days with no plans. The quiet exposes how dependent the nervous system became on movement and achievement for emotional regulation. Buddhist practice gently invites awareness back into simpler forms of being. Breathing without needing to earn it. Resting without apology. Walking without rushing. Watching sunlight without multitasking. Allowing one day to simply exist without turning it into judgment. These moments heal something deep inside the nervous system, because the body was never meant to exist under constant evaluation. Many emotionally exhausted people secretly carry an impossible standard, that every day must justify their worth somehow. But life is not meant to be lived like endless performance reviews. Some days are for effort, some days are for healing, some days are for grieving, some days are for stillness, some days are simply for surviving gently. Buddhist compassion softens the harshness people direct toward themselves around productivity. Compassion says, you are allowed to be human. You are allowed to slow down. You are allowed to rest before breaking. You are allowed to exist without proving yourself every moment. These truths feel almost radical in a world addicted to performance, but the nervous system deeply needs them, because emotional exhaustion often grows when rest becomes conditional instead of natural. The person says, "I'll rest after I finish everything," but everything is never fully finished. There is always another task, another pressure, another responsibility, another fear of falling behind, and the body quietly keeps waiting for permission to breathe. Buddhist teachings on presence restore emotional balance because they reconnect people to the idea that life itself is not a race to justify existence. You do not need to constantly earn your humanity. This realization changes the nervous system profoundly. The chest softens slightly. Breathing deepens slightly. Guilt loosens slightly. The mind begins learning that rest is not laziness. Stillness is not failure. Slowing down is not weakness. These are deeply healing truths for emotionally exhausted people, because many are not only tired from life itself, they are tired from carrying endless internal pressure to become more than human. To never stop, never slow down, never rest fully, never simply be. Eventually, the soul becomes exhausted from this impossible demand. And perhaps this is why Buddhist practice values simplicity so deeply. Simplicity interrupts the endless hunger for proving. It allows awareness to return to ordinary life again. A quiet meal, a slow breath, a peaceful evening, a day that was not extraordinary but still mattered. These moments restore emotional balance because they reconnect the nervous system to enoughness. Enough work for today. Enough effort for today, enough surviving for today. Not perfect, not complete forever, not endlessly productive, just enough. This does not mean abandoning growth or responsibility. It means releasing the emotional violence of never allowing yourself to feel complete in any moment. Many emotionally exhausted people have forgotten what completion feels like. They move from one demand to another without ever emotionally arriving anywhere. But healing begins when the nervous system finally hears something it has needed for a very long time. You do not have to keep proving your worth every second of your existence. And maybe peace begins there, not in doing more, not in becoming perfect, not in endless achievement, but in allowing one ordinary day to be enough without turning it into evidence against yourself. Because the exhausted heart does not always need more pressure. Sometimes it simply needs permission to stop carrying so much. Sometimes emotional exhaustion is not coming from doing too much. Sometimes it comes from carrying too much inside. Carrying thoughts that never stop. Carrying emotions that were never fully felt. Carrying pressure to be productive, pressure to be okay, pressure to control the future, pressure to keep pretending. And little by little, the mind becomes heavy, the body becomes tired, and the soul quietly forgets what peace feels like. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us of something gentle and powerful. You are not exhausted because you are weak. You are exhausted because your nervous system has been fighting, holding, suppressing, comparing, fearing, performing, and overthinking for far too long. Healing begins the moment awareness returns, the moment you stop running from yourself, the moment you allow this breath, this body, and this imperfect day to simply exist without so much resistance. Peace was never hiding in becoming perfect. It was waiting underneath the noise. And maybe tonight, for the first time in a long time, you can stop carrying everything alone. If this video spoke to something deep inside you, leave a comment below and share the one thing your heart has been carrying quietly for too long. Sometimes healing begins the moment we finally tell the truth about what has been hurting us. And if you want more peaceful Buddhist teachings to help calm the mind, heal emotional exhaustion, and reconnect you with yourself, subscribe to the channel and continue this journey with us.